Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Planning Committee B for August, and I'm Councillor Ben Burton, who chairs this committee. There's a little bit of housekeeping first. We've got quite a few people from the public, so if there's a fire alarm, it will be a genuine fire alarm. There aren't any tests expected, so just follow us down to the exits. In addition, there's toilets to the rear here if people need to use the toilet while they're there. We'll have short breaks at the end of each item so that if you need to leave, you can go out at that time. And likewise, if you need a break, then you can go to there as well. The only thing is just phones on silent or off. And also when anyone is speaking, if I can just remind you to use the microphones on the table. So if you just press the button that says mic and it'll light up green when it's on. I'll explain the details around the actual speaking to you when you come up to talk. So we'll cover that then. There's a number of apologies to start us off with today. So we have apologies from Councillor Coles, who's substituted by Councillor Rose, and Councillor Fenton, who is covered by Councillor Waller there as well. And we've also had last minute apologies from Councillor Baxter, who was unable to make it. So there isn't anyone substituting for her. She's just not here. And we may be joined by one other councillor in due course, depending on timings. So we will make a start. The first item is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations they would like to make for the meeting? No, that's fine. So we'll move forward. And the second item is the minutes from the previous meeting, which was the 20th of the 6th this year. Does anyone have any comments for the minutes, or are we happy to approve those? I think take that as consensus to approve. And item 3 is public participation. We don't have anyone under general public participation. What we'll have is people at the start for each item. Before we move on to item 4A, I'll just explain, in terms of public speaking, we'll take through the presentation first for each application and have initial questions. Then I'll invite each speaker up one by one. You'll have 3 minutes to talk. Just start when you're comfortable and make sure the mic's on. And then if you could just stay seated afterwards, and there may be questions from members, and then I'll let you go afterwards. Perfect timing before we started item 4A. We're joined by Councillor Bassey. So we will move on to item 4A, which is land to the west of 128 Garthway, New Earswick, joined by Gareth Arnold, who's the development manager. Could you take us through the presentation, please, Gareth?
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is land to the west of 128 Garthway, New Earswick. Proposal is for the erection of 14 dwellings and associated infrastructure following the demolition of existing garage courts. Just a very quick update, which isn't on the update sheet. So in paragraph 1.1, we refer to 6 two-bedroom dwellings and 8 3-bedroom dwellings. Should be the other way around. So it's 8 two-bedroom dwellings and 6 3-bedroom dwellings. I'm not aware whether that error is continued through the report, but just for that clarification there. So I'll go through this presentation. So we have the existing site plan. So these are the garage courts and the individual hatched blocks. These are existing residential terraces. These are the 2 small 2-story blocks of flats, which you'll see on the photographs. They're kind of within the site, but excluded. So the red line boundary excludes them, but includes their curtilage for reasons which will be apparent on the site plan. The existing garage blocks in elevation and photographs. aerial photographs. So you see the garage blocks with their light coloured roofs. Reasonable points out the conservation area. So the site is outside the conservation area, but adjacent to its boundary. So the conservation area boundary runs along the boundary of the site and then across the other side of the road, encompassing these flats, and then disappears down there. Photographs from ground level showing flats at 128 Garthway. Garage courts to the rear of the flats. So the proposed site plan, these are the semi-detached blocks of 2-bedroomed houses and semi-detached blocks of 3-bedroomed houses. Some of the blocks have in curtilage parking spaces, 26 parking spaces in total, including 6 visitor parking spaces. Elevations of the 2-bed house types and their floor plan. Elevation of the 3-bed house type and the floor plan. And then drawn images of the proposals in situ. This is a drawing which we've only recently received. So I'll go back to that site plan. The apartments flats have a brick built store. Each have a brick built store, which will be demolished as part of this proposals, and they're proposed to be re-provided here and here, and re-provided in brick. So 2 meters by 2.7 meter garden store for those properties, and that's in addition to the stores proposed for the new build dwellings. So take any questions on the drawings first before moving on to the update.
Councillor Melly.
The landscape architect said that new native hedge planting should be applied across the site and front of the existing apartment blocks. Has that been included in the plans? And if so, can you show us where that's referring to, please?
There is hedge planting proposed around the rear, shown on the site plan. But it's not shown on the frontage. But we do have a landscape condition. We don't have a landscape plan further than what's shown on the site plan, but there is a landscape condition. So if members felt that that was something that was necessary again, then that could be sought. I think in terms of, because at the moment it's open plan, you see from the photographs. So at the moment it's an open plan, which perhaps is not typical for New Earswick. But we don't feel it's needed for biodiversity net gain. That's covered by other inputs and other conditions, but something for members to consider.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor
Melly. Thank you. You showed us on the plans where the buildings were to be demolished and the existing building, the gardens of numbers 1 to 8, and then you were saying there's replacements that were at each end instead. Is that in paragraph 5.18, it says that a shed for the parking of a mobility scooter will be provided in the garden of existing flats. Is that what that was referring to?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Sorry, that's my understanding, although I do understand that garages have been re-provided at least for some, I don't know the precise details of the occupants of the flats, but if you go back to,
Well, this says it's a shed in the garden of the existing flats rather than a garage kind of outside the curtilage.
right, so these are the replacement sheds.
Yeah, so
And
they,
the 0.9 meter wide doorway should be sufficient to give access if somebody had a mobility scooter and wanted to put it in that shed. Yeah.
so they're for the sole use of the occupants of the existing properties at numbers 1 to 8.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Thanks.
Right, yeah, councillor Orrell. No.
Can you go back to the picture the photo which showed the entrance to the?
That one?
Yeah. There are 2 trees there which the report says are going to go.
Yeah.
Do we know where they're going to be replaced?
Yeah, that is shown on the drawings. Let's see if this works. Oh, can't magnify and use my pointer at the same time. So there are 2 replacement, actually the 2 replacement trees on both sides. Just slightly to the north and slightly to the south of the.
Do we know
trees that are
what
removed.
kind of trees they're going to be?
It's
Are they whips or are they going to be substantial trees? Or?
The landscape architect's suggestion is that they could be provided with a heavier standard, which would not be such a jarring change from what's there. But obviously, they're not going to match. But she suggested they could be provided with a heavier standard.
Right. And that's part of the landscape plan.
That's yes, that would be. We don't have a landscape plan at the moment. That's reserved by condition, but yeah, that's something that would be secured.
Councillor Waters.
You've mentioned the landscape plan and just refer to condition 15. I just hope it's not going to be carried forward as a 10-year replacement, and it needs to be for the lifetime of the development.
Okay.
Yeah, we can pick that up in discussion, but yeah, worth noting. Any other questions on plans? No.
On the plan.
Yeah, just on the plan so far. We'll come back to other questions after this. Great. We'll move into.
We've got this.
Oh, you've got an update to do.
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
So there is an update in front of members. An update to the officer report. The modified intentions members' attention to the modified policy H10, which is the affordable housing policy of the draft local plan. It's incorrectly stated in the report that seeks 20% affordable housing provision. As modified, it seeks a contribution equivalent of 10% for sites of up to 14 dwellings like this one. Condition 2, there's a revised plan, a replacement plan. Sorry, there's an additional plan for the replacement storage block that I showed you at the end of the presentation. Condition 18 just has an updated plan reference number. Condition 21. This has been amended to reserve the precise siting of the blocks to the storage blocks to the rear of the new houses. That's just to ensure the continuity of the hedgerow is maintained. So if that positioning just needs to be tweaked a little bit, so that it doesn't involve a breach in the hedgerow. Additional conditions relating to the replacement storage building, replacement drying facilities. Members might not have picked up that the land to the rear of the flats is being truncated by this development. So it just provides for replacement drying facilities in the interest of the residential amenities and sustainable development for those existing flats. The sustainable construction condition is referred to in the report, but wasn't carried through as a condition in the schedule of conditions. So that is included there on the second page. On the third page, there's updated comments from the housing strategy officer and some very minor updates to the recommendation in terms of the section 106 agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, if you have a question on that.
Yeah, some questions, Chair. On the affordable housing, it says 11 affordable housing, so presumably 3 for social rent? And are the affordable housing for sale or for rents?
Sorry, say that again.
Well, the report says from the housing strategy officer, it says 11 high quality affordable homes.
So you look for that. We'll come back to questions not on the plans afterwards. I'll give Gary time to read the bit, but we'll have the second.
So I think what he's saying there is 11 in addition to what would normally be required by the policy, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But it's 100% affordable housing.
Affordable or for social rent?
No, it is. Eight social rent, 6 shared ownership.
6 shared.
6 shared ownership, 8 social rent. Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, well, the additional consultation response from the housing strategy officer presumably replaces 3.19 on the existing document to fix the 20% to 10% amongst the other changes to that comment, as opposed to kind of being an additional consultation response. I guess it's a correction to the previous response. Is that right?
I'd say not necessarily, but it doesn't say anything which is.
There's no contradiction except that the
Yeah,
first
it doesn't
response on
contradict.
3.19 says 20% and this says 10%, which was the correction on paragraph 5.3 as well. So
Yeah, it could well have been that the policy has been, I can't pinpoint the dates of the modification of the policy, so it could be that original comment predated the modification to the plan.
okay, so both are still live, basically, both paragraphs.
Yeah, both are material.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move to public participation. The first person is Richard Cowling to speak on this application objection. If you could come up, please, Richard. You've got 3 minutes to talk, just start talking ready. Would you like a warning when you've got 30 seconds to go towards the end, or are you happy to just, yeah, I'll just give you a little nudge. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just take your time. Whenever you're ready, just start, and just make sure that the mic button's on there as well. Yeah.
Excuse me.
So,
Has the
sorry if I'm not camera. I don't want to be on it. Sorry. I press that. Can you hear me? Mic's on. Okay. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Anyway, it's new to me. This. I'm a resident of the existing flats, apartments. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to come and just put my point forward.
We feel that from the start of these proposals in the letter from October 21, everything has been about the benefit of the new development and nothing to do with the residents. We've just sort of been, you know, in one of the original diagrams, it actually said that the new development, communal gardens identified to benefit proposed development, not for us. So we're losing like our area, our garden and our drying area for washings, and that to provide basic, what they're taking the land is they're going to provide car parking spaces for the new build. We don't have any car parking spaces, but they want to take ours away to provide for anybody else. So, so we haven't been considering it really. We believe also that to build 14 houses on this bit of land here is a bit excessive. As described in the appraisal in like your 5.2, it actually mentions the policy H2 on the density and says if you include our properties in it, it actually takes it over the density for what it should be, like the 40, whatever hectare. I mean, I don't understand it all. It's on that one, on the side of it. So, and it's going to cause even more. We have issues at the moment with parking and trying to get parked around the area. And this, now they're widening the road and they're taking part of the parking out from the front of the flats. It's going to make it even worse. But everything seems to be, oh, well, it's okay. It's social housing. So we can skip over a few things that aren't quite right. It all seems, especially when plans have already been agreed now to build 117 new homes on the old school playing field, which trusts have been trying to get through for years. It's been knocked off, but they've got them now. So why they need to put so many on this bit of land, I don't understand. It seems to me also that I'm reading this affordable housing comments update of August 24. The council can secure nominations for rent of 75% of the social rent properties. So have a vested interest in seeing these plans approved. I mean, is that correct? I mean, I don't, you know, I mean, I'm not really sort of thing, but is that why it's getting pushed through? Now, the applicant, Joseph Fowntrees, also stated that we will be kept updated on any continued plans but we've heard nothing since March 2022.
Yeah, you've got 30 seconds just to
Which was actually from York Council about the planning application, not from the trust. I've just noticed that these plans for the replacement sheds have come in the last 2 days. I mean, why is it taking that long? We've been wondering, you know, we would sort of thought we would get that, but nothing's been, that's why I came to what it was one of the issues. But now it's gone on 2 days later. And the only other mention is the conservation area. On the initial plans on that, we've been told for years that these properties were in the conservation area. And we couldn't have anything done like windows and anything like that because we were in the conservation area. But funny enough, when these plans turned out, the conservation area now goes round and goes across the front of the buildings rather than round the back of the buildings. Okay. And yet these properties were all built at the same time as the rest is Wright Rose Avenue and even before
that's the 3 minutes,
flats.
but yeah, I get.
You know, right, that's the time. So that's my opinion on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And just for 1 second, does anyone have any questions for the speaker? Yeah, Councillor Orrell, isn't it? We've got hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll, for coming to speak to us. There are 8 residents of the flats. Do you know how many had garages?
Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us actually. 6. There was at least 6, not all at that side, not in all the ones that got down because I have a garage that isn't actually in these plans. It was over the road.
And so, have you lost the garages now?
Yeah, they've taken everybody's off them now. Yeah, they haven't. As far as I'm aware, they haven't actually. There's one of the lady that is disabled, and they haven't allocated her a garage.
So of the 5 or 6 of you, none of you have had a garage allocated as yet.
There's 2 people, I believe. 2 people that have been allocated garages in just across the road. But that's as far as I know. I mean, as I say, I was lucky I already had a garage over the road, so I wasn't in these blocks, fortunately. I mean, they did send me a letter telling me they were going to not telling me I had to vacate mine, but I don't think they realised where it was.
Sure.
They've got the wrong position, so I had to get stressed us out a bit, but they apologised and said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't realise."
Thank you very much.
So,
thanks.
Well, yeah, other
Great,
than
thank
that, it's just gonna be a bit of a free for all. I mean, they have told us.
Thanks, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Is there any, yeah, councillor Cullick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just say a little more how the parking situation is now? What parking do you have available?
We don't have any we don't have any spaces that we're allowed. I actually park over the road where it's actually where the other flats are. I always have done because I used to live in the other flats. So I park over just, as you can see on the end of the other garage block, which is opposite side of the road. I park in a space there, which we do get in, but it's again, there's no marked bays, so if anybody's in them, they're in them, and then you've got to go. I mean, I have a garage down there, and sometimes we struggle to get into the garages further down because of the vehicles that are parking for the flats. So we can't really park on the road outside ours because we used to have it. Well, we had a neighbour over there, these driveways off the things, and even though we're opposite, like the drop curbs, we're not on their side of the road. We used to have a bit of an argument. Oh, you know, they wouldn't said we couldn't park opposite their drive. So for years we had a bit of to do about parking on there. And to be honest, I'd rather park where I do park than park on the side of the road. Rather than we've had people coming by and we've had vehicles parked on there where somebody's come by and maybe knocked a mirror off, or because that actual section of the road, the first section as you go in, is quite narrow compared with the next section of road. I pointed it out to a guy the other day. So if you get a wide vehicle parked, getting through makes it a bit more. I mean,
Thanks. Sorry, Jeff, supplementary.
Yeah, if I could. So I'm just trying to understand as far as you're able, what, if this application were to go through, what improvement do you think could be made in terms of parking for those of you who are already occupants of the flats?
I don't know, not with the amount of houses that they're doing, obviously in the area. I mean, I think we're going to get more, we'll get more overflow from their properties, to be honest with you. I mean, we don't, as I said, we haven't been allocated a space because it's old housing, you don't get allocated. So I don't know what you can do really, other than we'll just have to, you know, looks like we're going to have to suck it and see, as they say.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any questions, so if you want to take a seat, but thank you for coming to speak. That's really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time anyway.
The next speaker is Jeff Beacon, who's come to speak on parking. If you could join us, please, Jeff. Would you like any warning? I think you're well versed in this, so if you're happy to, yeah, thank you.
Is that on now? Thank you, Chair. Ready?
Yeah.
At a recent council meeting, the Lord Mayor was required to say York's target for net zero is 2030. You all know that's impossible. It will require the citizens of York to stop flying, driving cars, even electric ones, and giving up beef, lamb and dairy by 2030. The Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust is a parallel organisation to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Their proposal here is for affordable housing in New Earswick, so should mean residents are not particularly affluent and have lower than average greenhouse emissions. In 2013, Joseph Rowntree's published research showing that greenhouse emissions increase drastically with affluence. In York, the affluent residents of Copmanthorpe, Bishopthorpe and Woodthorpe have emissions several times those of the less affluent residents of Fishergate and Guildhall. New Earswick emissions are between the two extremes. Car ownership in New Earswick is also between the high of Copmanthorpe and the low of Fishergate. Around 2015, Joseph Rowntree switched interest from climate change to inclusive growth. Inclusive growth aimed to increase overall consumption, but making sure the consumption of the poorest increased too. Everybody was to consume more and consequently produce more emissions. Fortunately, the slogan inclusive growth is now seen less often. The New Earswick scheme is planning for high car ownership by planning 2 parking places for most of these houses. Car ownership is a very strong predictor of carbon emissions. I detect that Joseph Roundtree's approach to climate has recently improved, but we should remember Derwentthorpe. This scheme won prizes for being sustainable, but when the carbon footprints of the residents were estimated, Derwentthorpe residents were found to have higher carbon emissions than York's average. We should take the damaging effects of car ownership seriously, not just climate effects, but also remember that high car ownership diminishes local services and public transport. Perhaps Joseph Rowntree now recognises this, and it's York Council standard for 2 cars per new house that causes the problem. This standard blocks any attempt to reach net zero.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the speaker before they go on? I don't see any questions, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll take that into account as we go forward. Can I call up the final speaker, who is Catherine Dukes, speaking in support as the agent on behalf of the applicant. Would you like a warning, or are you happy with your 3?
I'm hoping it's within the 3 minutes.
Okay,
so
great. I'll
thank
just
you.
let you know at the end.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the chance to speak in support of the scheme for 14 affordable houses at Garthway West. As most of you will be aware, Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust is an institution rooted in York that has historically provided social housing and care on a not-for-profit basis. We know York is in a housing crisis with a severe shortage of affordable homes impacted by rising house prices and rent. The waiting list for affordable housing is long and only increasing, as not enough homes are available or are being built. This situation needs to change, and this development offers an important opportunity. The site is one of a number of former garage sites that Joseph Rowntree wished to redevelop in order to increase their stock of smaller family homes consisting of both shared ownership and social rent. A Section 106 agreement will secure nomination rights for the council of well beyond the planning policy requirement of 10%. The garages are no longer fit for purpose as they are too small for the size of many modern cars, and Joseph Rowntree is finding that the majority are now rented for purely storage. As such, the garages are largely no longer being used for their intended purpose. For tenants who wish to retain a garage for the parking of a car, and Joseph Rowntree has already provided the opportunity for reallocation elsewhere. Additionally, the existing flats fronting Garthway are provided with new sheds within their grounds as part of the scheme. The proposed 2 and 3 bedroom houses are located outside but adjacent to the conservation area boundary of New Earswick. Considerable expertise have been invested in the design by a notable architect to ensure the homes will contribute to the future history of the garden village. The expertise has extended to not just the architecture, but addressing climate change as through the orientation, window apertures, incorporation of air source heat pumps, and in taking a fabric-first approach, the development is expected to exceed the 2013 building regulations and exceed the council's current mandatory policy target of 31%. The properties will also benefit from electric car chargers and bike stores to encourage more sustainable travel choices. All the houses are designed to meet M42 standards for accessibility and adaptability, ensuring that residents will have level access throughout the ground floor, and the houses can remain lifetime homes through their ability to be adapted in the future. Overall, the proposal will make a positive contribution to the supply of affordable and climate change resilient homes in the city by making efficient use of a brownfield site, and so we kindly seek committee support for the application today.
Thank you. Got Councillor Rose with a question to start with.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered if you could, I guess, respond to the first residents' participation that we had around parking and impact. And I know that you've just said that there's been this offer to kind of rehouse people who are using the garages in that respect, but it sounds like that hasn't been straightforward. It hasn't been completed. Beyond that, obviously, there is limited existing parking. People, as said, are parking on the neighbouring areas. There's limited parking on this side. I just wanted to understand your perspective on to what extent you're able to give genuinely equivalent amenities on parking to the existing residents, and what you expect the impact to be on their parking in general.
So at the moment in time, or previously, the occupants of Garthway there is no off-street parking in support of the flats. So it is that them with many of the other residents around New Earswick. So we've got to remember New Earswick was built at a time when car ownership was very low or didn't exist. And it's caused a situation where a lot more residents do own cars, but a lot of properties don't necessarily have car parking provision or off-site. So there have been garages that were built as a particular phase of development to accommodate that demand. But what's been found is across the whole of New Earswick, people have actually ended up using the garages for storage rather than actually keeping cars. And so that's what's led to this review of a number of garage sites where Joseph Rowntree has practically looked at whether there's enough occupation to justify retention of the garages or whether they would be better put to elsewhere, because we all know, you know, land within York, it's in short supply. And so having gone through a review, a number of sites were identified where it's felt that actually they weren't being put to best use. They certainly weren't necessarily being put to 100% storage of parked cars. And what we were finding across New Earswick was actually that there's actually a good proportion of the garages that are rented to people who live outside of New Earswick even. They are literally just used for storage rather than parking the cars. So with this particular scheme itself, and with all the others, what's happened is Joseph Rowntree has actually given notice now to all the garage tenants across all those sites and then reallocated the garages on the basis of those that actually do want a garage for garage sake, for storing of a car. Because it was felt that because there were a number of sites, rather than trying to on an ad hoc basis, and those that were given notice because the planning permissions come through first, such as Willow Bank, and then those getting first allocation, then the later schemes then being left without the ability because the garages were running out. Actually, everybody was given notice at the same time. So all the garages that are affected have now been given notice and all tenants have been asked to vacate. All the garages, all the people who have then asked for garages then being reallocated. So it is that situation has been dealt with and it's now something that isn't necessarily material anymore.
Yeah, I guess just to thank you for that. And I guess that explains how you're managing people who aren't using garages appropriately. But it'd be good to get a take on how you currently manage the parking situation in general for people who don't use the roads and parking, appropriately. If there are people parking in front of other garages that makes them inaccessible, all that sort of stuff. What management is there around cars at the moment for those areas where you do manage the
That's sort of separate, isn't it? That's a nuisance issue rather than a planning issue. If people are parking in front of garages where they shouldn't be, then that's part of the general estate management. It's certainly not.
It is part of the general estate management, but it does have a direct bearing on the impact of what we're looking at today. That's why I'm asking to what extent is that parking challenge that is going to be exacerbated by this planning application managed by the estate at the moment?
All those from this scheme who wanted a garage have been reallocated one, and that includes a particular lady who actually has a car parked and she's been reallocated one on the opposite side of the road. So everybody's been given a garage who wanted one and in close proximity, but it certainly won't cause a nuisance or a problem because those that want garages for the sake of parking a car have now been reallocated one. So it shouldn't cause a problem, especially because this scheme, each house has more than enough parking spaces for the size of the property. So they've all got 2 spaces each. And then there are then a further, is it 4 visitor parking spaces at the bottom? And that then means that those 4 spaces will generally be provided across to serve this scheme, but also may end up providing parking for the residents as well at Garthway because they're not allocated parking spaces.
Thanks. Councillor Orrell.
Yeah. Can I just follow up? So I didn't quite catch what you said. Are you saying that the visitor parking spaces on the new development will be available for Garthway residents?
They're not allocated to any of the houses within the scheme because each of the scheme have 2 parking spaces each.
Yeah.
So they're generally available within the area.
So people in Garthway will be able to park in the visitor parking spaces in the new development?
As far as I'm aware, there's not going to be any parking restrictions applied that would prevent them from not being able to do so, but it'd be on a first come first served basis, I imagine.
So anybody who's lost a garage will be able to park there.
Potentially, but it is that those who've lost garages who want a garage have now been given an alternative garage. So nobody's without a parking space who actually wants one.
So everybody who lost a garage has been allocated.
Who wanted one, yes.
Who won? Okay.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I've got a couple. I'll come, you still got a question? Yes, yeah, I'll come to you first. Councillor Bassey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I want to address another issue. When I've been looking through this, you mentioned climate change and affordable housing. I don't see any reference to renewable energy being generated on this site. Have I missed something? Is there an intention to make use of renewable energy, to help cut carbon emissions and reduce energy bills for the occupants of these houses? And if not, why not?
There are air source heat pumps as part of the scheme, which is a renewable energy, but we haven't purposely put solar panels on because there is an expectation that that will be part of a review as to whether to include them at a later date, but not necessarily immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Waller, a question then.
Thank you, Chair. It wouldn't have been obvious to people viewing this meeting that councillors were seeing shaking of heads to the question that if people wanted a garage, they had already been offered a replacement garage. So I just want to clarify at what time of the year that offer has been made.
I was going through my emails trying to remind myself because there was a formal process where everybody was written to and given notice to quit the garages where they had one. And as part of that, they were then invited to actually write in and to make an approach, phone call, emails, to say and make clear that they wanted another garage. So if they, so as that past that process, they knew to exit the garage and also then to ask for one if they wanted one. But everybody's been through that process.
Right, and on the issue of transport, the cycle parking provision that you're talking about, what exactly does that constitute? Because I'm aware there have been comments from Derwentthorpe that it wasn't what people had imagined they were going to get.
We've got to remember that Derwentthorpe was built at a different time. And since then, policy and requirements have moved on. So the latest version of the local plan actually includes cycle storage requirements in terms of size. So these storage units actually meet the council standards for parking storage, which didn't exist back in the Derwentthorpe days. So it's all down to the dimensions. So it should be that they're all large enough to accommodate at least 2 bicycles because they meet the requirements in terms of door width, length, width, the cycle storage.
So it's, just to clarify, it's the size of the box,
Yes.
Not that there's a Oxford hoop built in. It's just a box.
The policy requirement is a box
Right.
that allows for sufficient capacity. I think it's for 2 cycles at least.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, I was supplementary, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I'm trying to carve to, I guess, the facts of the situation, and there's a little bit of language floating around. So when you said previously that everyone who wants spaces and allocated one, what you mean is everyone who has responded to requests went through the formal process during the time frame you were seeking that consultation from residents was given one, but there might be people who would want one who didn't go through that exact process currently. Is that?
Well, so in serving the notice for all the existing tenants to vacate the garages, they were then asked at the same time if they would like a new garage elsewhere. Some people have taken some chasing either to vacate the garage or else just to, and to respond to that correspondence. So in that way, they have had more than one ask as to whether they'd like a replacement, but it's all part of the same process of please vacate the garage. If in vacating, would you like a garage?
Yeah, I'm not accusing of any wrongdoing in process. I guess I'm just saying there are people who have busy lives and challenging circumstances who may not have been responding formally to that, but who may still want those spaces. It's just trying to get an understanding of where we are with these. The same with, again, not suggesting that that the application is incorrect for having unallocated visitor parking and for taking away the garages that are there today. But there is a noted concern with some specific anecdotal points made around parking challenges in the area that directly responds to the parking challenges that are being corrected by this. So I'm just trying to make sure that we understand where we're at today and what the changes will make. That so.
This is, well, anybody who wants a garage at any point in time has been able to approach Joseph Rowntree and ask if there's any vacant garages to rent, or else would be added to the waiting list. So that hasn't changed. That is still an opportunity, just with the houses as well.
I think that's, sorry, Councillor Melly, you have a question on this?
It was a supplementary about a previous question actually about cycle storage.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, one more on that.
Just the specific one that was asked was about someone who had mobility challenges, and so them being potentially able to get a garage further afield. Finding a garage isn't necessarily the same thing as finding appropriate parking near their house. So I just wanted to just understand that challenge exists, right? There is a challenge of being able to find something that is appropriate for the homeowners, particularly for people who might be disabled or need parking close to their location.
That particular occupant had 2 garage units. One was for the keeping of a mobility scooter and the other one was for the parking of a car. The mobility scooter will fit into the new store that's to be provided, and then they have been offered a garage on the opposite side of the road. If you look at the relative distances, the new provision is actually nearer than the previous garages that they were renting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Melly, sorry, a question on that.
Thank you, Chair. Just because somebody asked a question about cycle storage and you talked about modern standards for cycle storage, and you're also saying that, is it a large proportion of the new dwellings or all of them will be accessible in terms of level access and manoeuvring space and that sort of thing? Does that mean the cycle storage will be suitable for adapted cycles and accessible cycles?
That's a different thing because there's a policy requirement. So building regs requires level access. Planning policy requires a cycle store to a certain standard, and both have been met.
Okay, so because our cycle storage standards don't require accessible cycle parking, it's not being provided to accompany the accessible dwellings?
It's not explicit in terms of the nature of the provision, but given the width of the doors and the size of the actual units, then yes, it should be that someone can fit a wheelchair in or an adapted bike, but that's not an explicit requirement, if that makes sense. So it's more implicit rather than explicit that yes, the standards should allow for, rather than it being an actual requirement.
Thank you. Can I ask another question, Joe?
Got a pile. I'm gonna right, I'm gonna come. I know you've been waiting for our councillor orals, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Lynn.
2 questions, Chair. Following up from what your answer to Councillor Bassey about solar panels, at what point will you decide whether solar panels are required? What timescale would that be?
I'm not party to the actual timings of any review, but
I'm just gonna, to save some of these, we can only make the decision on what's here. So assuming whether or not the solar panels are there, that's the decision that you've got in front of you, not whether they might bring solar panels into it in the future. So sorry, if you've got a second question.
Yeah. Sure. The shared ownership, affordable shared ownership, how is that calculated?
It's down to the policy. So in the council's policy, it actually sets out the separation between the proportion of shared ownership and the proportion of social rent. So it is that we started off in a policy compliant position, but it's now in excess of that in terms of, well, it's still policy compliant, I think, in terms of the split, but the amount is disproportionate to the actual policy requirement. Because policy requirement is only 10%. This is now 100% affordable.
So how will the affordable element be calculated?
It's split policy compliant in that the local plan splits it. I think it's 60-40. And so it's 60-40 split between social and,
Yes, yeah, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, there will be for a shared ownership, there must be a price.
oh, sorry, right, sorry. No, well, this is it. So Joseph Rowntree, it's all about what people want, isn't it? So they're able to ask for a percentage of how much is rent and how much is mortgage.
Yes.
So it's down to the applicant as far as I'm aware.
But how will the price of the house that's going to be shared, how will that be calculated?
On the same basis as with all the social housing. It's no different to any other social housing, the way it's costed out for the rent.
I won't get into it. There's a red book valuation that's done, and it has to be based on whatever the surveyor's report is. That's how the shared ownership calculation is done. Right, question. Councillor Cullick, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the first points made by the first public speaker, and reflecting something which comes up at various points in the report, is reference to the density of the proposed development, particularly in the context, the density when one takes into account the number of units already on site with the flats, but also in the wider context of the garden village of New Earswick. It does seem to be somewhat out of keeping, doesn't reflect either the conservation area or the general vernacular of New Earswick. I'd love to hear your comment on that.
If you look directly to the north, you can see that there are rows of terraces. New Earswick is predominantly characterised in areas with rows of terraces. So this is actually lower density to some of the older parts of New Earswick, in that we're proposing semi-detached rather than terraces. So I mean, it's all about creating variety, isn't it? At the end of the day, what we're providing are 2 and 3 bedroom homes for people, and they're not overly large on purpose, because this is what the housing need in York is demanding. So we're responding directly to the housing need within City York in accordance with planning policy and the supporting evidence of the local plan, which makes clear that smaller homes are what is needed. So the density reflects housing need in York. National policy promotes and pushes for the efficient use of land. So it is that higher densities are what are desirable, and the fact that we've been able to deliver in the scheme 2 and 3 bedroom houses with sufficient parking, gardens that are of a size that actually provides a decent amount of amenity, with all the distances achieved between offsets to other dwellings to protect amenity, it should actually be commended. The fact that we've achieved such a density and the layout to provide affordable housing, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And don't forget, those flats, where you get flats, that generally is in a higher density to houses. We have a block of flats on the opposite side of the road as well, which is high density, and it'll achieve a higher density than our scheme here. But yes, it's just the fact that we've got so many detached, they're not even terraces that you find across a lot of New Earswick.
Right, thanks. Right, I'm going to take 2 more questions. So Councillor Waters, please, and I'll come to you, Councillor Ellie. Hold it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I was glad when one of the speakers referred to Derwentthorpe, which, despite the environmental rhetoric, is just one gigantic car park. And I've sat here and listened to all the concerns about car parking and the loss of garages and all the rest of it. And I'm just confused that the Rowntree organisation haven't put this forward as a development with no car parking, whereby the rental properties could be offered on no car tenancy agreements. If you're shared ownership, you can't purchase a share in the property unless you sign up to not having a car. Why isn't something like that being considered rather than creating what will be a fraught situation for the existing residents?
I think it's a bit unfair to suggest it's a fraught situation for existing residents when they don't have parking provision, and all those who wanted to carry on renting a garage have been offered one. And there is now 4 visitor parking spaces they might have access to as well. So this is policy compliant in the City York Council requires a number of parking spaces per dwelling, and we've provided that. We're not in the middle of the city centre to suggest that everywhere is accessible by foot, but equally, we've offered an opportunity for residents to use alternative means of transport because of cycle provision. And we know as well that this is within walking distance to bus stops. So it's about providing an opportunity and choice of means of transport rather than dictating as to how people should live.
Thanks. Quick supplementary.
Thank you for that answer, but again, the rhetoric that's often espoused by the Roundtree organisation is not matched when it comes to applications like this, is it?
I think
That's not a planning question.
no.
that
I think
can
I
answer.
think you've got to your decisions determined on what's there in the application. Which take for that. Councillor Melly, question please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the accessibility standards, kind of the space in the dwellings, does that, for the new dwellings, does that include storage space for mobility aids such as wheelchairs and electric scooters, or are future residents of these dwellings likely to need garage space to store those sorts of things?
The houses are of sufficient size to meet national space standards, and they have been provided with adaptability to allow people to live in them in a way that if they need additional aids, then they can be provided.
I'm just, does that mean in terms of moving around within the dwelling, or does it mean if you need to store something such as a mobility scooter, that storage space is included?
It's about moving around a property. Because if you're in the house and you need a wheelchair, you'll be using the wheelchair anyway. So you don't necessarily need to store something in addition because it's going to still be needed, isn't it?
But you said that, or I can't remember if it was you, somebody said that people are renting garages to store mobility aids. So if that's the case, then, I mean, there's lots of people who have different mobility aids. You know, they maybe need an electric scooter for long distances to go out of the house, but they don't need it inside their house, or they have a small, very maneuverable, nimble wheelchair for inside their home and something bigger and better for more uneven surfaces and longer distances outside the home. There's lots of people who have multiple mobility aids and need somewhere to.
Yeah, no, you're
store
absolutely
it.
right. I guess I can see where you're coming from. So at the point where someone needs a mobility scooter, they're unlikely to be riding a bicycle. So imagine that given the fact that the cycle stores are of sufficient size for the doors and internal storage, that they'll be able to swap out a bicycle with a mobility scooter because they are big enough to fit one in.
One last
Yeah,
question.
a final question about parking provision. Because we've heard from some people that there's very little parking capacity already in the neighbourhood, and that will be exacerbated by this. Has there been some sort of assessment of how much parking is needed, and that's why 6 visitor parking spaces have been settled on as required and including part of the development?
It was more a case of, we know what the policy requirement is for private parking spaces, and then there was an area that would allow for further provision in addition to that. So it wasn't, the thing about planning is there's no requirement and there's no expectation that a new development will address existing issues. It's only expected to address the issues that arise from the development itself. And that's what we've done here. So like I say, the garages, everybody who has suggested that they might want a garage has now been allocated one. We've ended up with 4 visitor parking spaces in addition to all the houses having 2 parking spaces each. And so the development actually satisfies its own requirements and probably will provide a little bit more because there are visitor spaces that won't be allocated to any of the existing houses.
Because outdoor amenity space is important, and it sounds like parking provision is important, and that's what we're going to have to weigh up in the planning balance, is that this application includes removing some of the shared existing garden to provide visitor parking. So I'm just trying to understand what weight, you know, what evidence is there behind the necessity of those visitor parking spaces that means that loss of outdoor amenity is acceptable. So are you saying that those visitor spaces are needed for the new development, not to address any parking problems of the wider area?
It was that all the proposed houses have 2 parking spaces each, which is sufficient for their own needs. There are then some visitors parking spaces being provided in addition to that essential need. So it was that there was an idea that there would be some floating car parking spaces. But it's not that those parking spaces are rising out of development, it is that there was an opportunity. But in terms of the gardens, the flats still have more than an essential need of open space. So we haven't taken anything away from the existing flats. That means that they're then left with less than what's acceptable. So everything has sufficient, if not in excess of what's actually required to meet needs.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think any other questions we can ask. So yeah, thank you for your time. If you want to take a seat in the back,
Thank
thanks. Right, well, after that, do there have any follow-up questions for officers following that discussion that they want any clarity? Officer, sorry, it's a clarification. Not the feeling over words. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my questions are about paragraph 5.31. I just want to make sure I've understood what's said here. So it says, recently amended states that all new residential building development of one or more dwellings should achieve on-site carbon emission reductions of a minimum of 31% over and above the requirements of building regulations, of which at least 19% should come from energy efficiency measures. So I just want to make sure I've understood that. Is this 19% of the total carbon emissions of that property, or is it 19% of the 31%? If that makes sense. I just want to clarify what we're talking about here. Are we expecting 19% of the total emissions from the property to come from energy efficiency? Or are we expecting 19% of that 31% reduction to come from energy efficiency? It gives a very different result.
That's 19 and 31. If I recall correctly. And it's fabric energy efficiency. I think the policy as written in 5.31 might possibly predate some of the modifications. Could be slightly different in the policy, sorry, in the condition that's set out on the second page of the update. So that specifies fabric energy efficiency shall achieve a 19% or more reduction in carbon emissions compared with the target emission ratings required under Part L. So that's of that 31%, 19% is by fabric. So essentially of the 100%, we're talking about 6% reduction. I'll take your word for that. 20% of the 31%, essentially. Yeah, okay, I follow what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think it's 19 out of the 31. So then it's 12 out of the 31 that is not that. So then you'd have 19% of the 100% would be energy efficiency from this. And then 12% would be things like electric cars, bike provision, solar panels, etc. I think that's my understanding of what that 30% is.
We're getting into the for some reference. Yeah. For some reference, what it's trying to achieve is so that instead of that 31% being provided by renewables, but not being actually a reduction in how much energy is used, it's trying to encourage fabric first efficiency so that you're taking it off based on that rather than just putting solar panels on but continuing to have like a gas thing. That's the policy as I understand it.
Thank you.
Used to pat the job. Okay, any other questions on to officers? Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up 3.29 was the response from the York Civic Trust, and they said specifically that their concern around the lack of chimneys was that the other buildings on the premise have chimneys. I just wanted to confirm with you, if that's okay, that the two existing blocks marked in red on the map that we've got in front of us currently have chimneys, and the ones above them do. But you can see in that picture, everything south that row, the ones that effectively this is an extension of, they don't have chimneys. So I just wanted to confirm that that is your understanding as well.
My recollection, yes.
There are chimneys.
I'm not quite sure the date of this is clearly an extension. 1980s, 90s, maybe.
So all of the ones within the conservation area have chimneys, but all of the ones to the south of this site don't. And
Yes.
I guess just picking up one of the comments that have been made by the residents that relates to that is, it does strike me as odd that those two buildings are not part of the conservation area when they are the only properties that aren't in the conservation area that have chimneys. And I just wondered if you could shed any light on why that isn't part of the conservation area. I assume it was built later in keeping with, but is it likely they've been given advice that they can't make amendments because the comments back would be to try and keep it in keeping with the conservation area, even though it's not part of it, or that it seems like there's some muddiness around that?
I'm not sure I can help with that. All I can say is the conservation area boundary goes along the boundary and then crosses the road. And excludes these properties. I doubt whether, because they're owned by the, because they're housing trust properties, I'm not sure that advice would have come from the city council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. There's quite a lot in the report about the architectural design of the proposed dwellings and comments about the window design, the colour and the shape of the windows and the style of the roof. I'm just, what I couldn't understand from the report is whether the view of the planning officers is that this design would harm or conserve or enhance the conservation area.
No, I think it says neutral.
Neutral.
So 511
so
on page 17.
Conserve?
No, oh, it doesn't say neutral. It says no harm to
So
the
does that
setting
mean-
of the conservation
Does that mean it conserves?
conservation area.
Does that mean it conserves the setting of the conservation area?
It does.
Okay.
It
Thank you.
conserves yeah, well, that conserving and enhancing is a test of impact within the conservation area. So what we're looking at is impact on the setting of the conservation area, which I don't think those tests directly apply to. So we've used the, yeah, we've suggested there's no harm to the setting.
Okay, but there's no requirement for it to conserve or enhance the setting because it's not in the conservation area.
That was always my understanding of the Planning, Conservation and Listed Building Areas Act, but I'm not aware of any legal judgment that differs from that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Collick, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully aware that what I'm about to ask is dealt with within the report, but I think it's good that it's actually articulated within the context of our thinking here. And I'm referring particularly to the density of the development, which again, I asked questions about earlier, was picked up by our first public speaker. Is there any concern that this is an overdevelopment of the site?
Yeah, in 3.14, they're the comments of the design manager. So what he says is the scheme is still more dense than the typical buildings in the immediate vicinity. I thought it's somewhat out of character with this, it's not ideal. But then he says that the visual impacts on the main public routes are low. The overall site layout strategy is a good one. Architectural design of building is quite attractive. The proposal has support on design grounds. So, you know, the person employed by the city council to give design advice has acknowledged it's slightly more dense than the surroundings. It's not in the conservation area. I would say that there's nothing in that design and layout where I think we could justify refusal or reason on design grounds. If you're looking along that for that line.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thanks. See a hand from Councillor Waller. Yeah.
Thank you. Just in terms, now the issue of the dark grey coloured window frames has been raised. From a thermodynamic perspective, is that likely to create problems for people living in those homes when it's a warm day and they're trying to close those windows?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
There have been developments in other parts of the city where aesthetic decisions relating to the colour of the window frames has created difficulties to the people living in there on warm days when they need to close the windows.
In that the frames become too hot?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
and the metal expands and you can't close the window.
I'm afraid that's completely outside my my sphere.
I think
I'm
the only
afraid.
thing to add would be that
I can't imagine that windows which are on the market for, I haven't heard of the situation you raise. I would imagine that the products on the market and have been specified by the architect would work at this latitude.
I'll follow up with you outside of the meeting.
Okay.
Materials are to be conditioned, so there's space, there's scope after the meeting in some ways, if they're not.
Yes. Yeah, but what we generally what's shown on the drawings, the approval of samples is the particular type. It doesn't normally give us the scope to, if they've shown a grey window frame and they provide a grey window frame, then we don't normally have the grounds to say, actually, we think it should be a white window frame or a black window frame.
Right, Councillor Orrell, please, and then Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Is the viability report confidential?
I think it's in two parts. So it's there is usually a summary which is available and is not confidential, but generally there's usually one that sits in the background that would be confidential. So there's an executive summary, I think, on the review, which is on the website.
So that the report is on the website or part of it?
Certainly the review is, the executive summary of the applicant's financial viability assessment
Right.
is on the website, but it's quite a small document.
Okay. And follow up on viability, the report says that Huntington and New Earswick are oversupplied with sports provision. Do you know if that includes the stadium?
I don't.
Because the stadium's a city provision, it's not a ward provision.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that, but it is it's done, the assessment is done on the ward, so it doesn't boil down into just New Earswick or as far as I'm aware, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, and Councillor Melly.
Have the details for household waste collection been, are the details already provided, or is that subject to condition?
I think it's already been provided. So there is the refuse vehicle doesn't enter this courtyard, and there's a bin collection point. It can enter and turn round. That's been tracked, and these. See if I can blow it up. Yeah, so these are bin stalls on the front, to the front.
So have waste services seen those details and approved them?
Yeah, my understanding.
3.18, I think.
Well, 3.18 says that the plan is acceptable if the access road is adopted and if the road width is a minimum of 5 meters and if it satisfies the criteria within the waste information developers guide. So there's a lot of ifs
Yeah, well,
rather than,
ultimately the decision is that of the local planning authority, so we take everything into the mix, but they what's it say about the road? Minimum of 5 meters.
if it's adopted and a minimum of 5 meters. Not just to adopt all standards, but if it's actually adopted and to a minimum of 5 meters.
Well, it does show we have seen the drawing's been submitted, which tracks the refuse collection vehicle, and that was requested by our highways colleagues. And I see why they would have requested that if they didn't expect the refuse vehicle to enter. So all we've been asked to provide in terms of a collection point outside curtilage is that one there, because this won't be adopted. So I assume that will be adopted, but that's an assumption. I don't know that.
So do you know if that collection point, because I think waste services have maximum distances that they'll travel for things like assisted collections, don't they, to actually go to a property to move a bin to the collection point? Is that within their maximum distance? So that people, you know, if they're having to have an accessible property, they're maybe likely to require assisted collections. Will they be able to have it? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay.
And that bin collection point is there because of because it won't be, it's some of the properties are beyond that distance that the operatives will collect it, but to the detail of if a resident has an assisted bin collection, I'm afraid I don't know that one.
Right. I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll move forward to discussion. So discussion on conditions and also around the officer recommendation and whether people are happy to move that. So would anyone like to start? Councillor Melly?
I have a question about condition 15, which we said earlier would come back to. It's about the landscape scheme.
Yes.
I was just wondering why the condition would come into effect within a period of 6 months from the practical completion rather than kind of prior to occupation, or some sort of commencement condition rather than a post-completion condition. And also the question that Councillor Waters raised earlier about 10 years rather than in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So landscaping schemes are normally required to be implemented following the completion of the development. Sometimes they're worded that in terms of the first planting season, I guess 6 months potentially covers that. This would have been wording that would have been given to us by the landscape architect, I assume, but that's it. It's standard for the landscaping to wait until the end, so it doesn't get.
I mean, I suppose my concern is that with any planning approval, it doesn't all have to be completed. If they were to build 4 or 5 of the buildings instead of all 6 or 7, or however many there are, would they have to provide the landscaping scheme? Whereas if it's prior to first occupation, then we guarantee that the landscaping scheme will have to be implemented. It's wording that I've recognised from other.
It is slightly different. I'm afraid I can't recall whether the last scheme we granted was based on occupation or on completion. I guess there might be an issue where, as you point out, depending on how they build out the scheme, there might be people moving in to say the southernmost, whilst the northernmost part of the site is still under construction. You wouldn't want the whole of the landscaping scheme to have to be. You wouldn't want to hold up. You wouldn't want to hold up occupation of affordable houses because they didn't implement the landscaping scheme in the areas which were still under construction. So I don't think it will be as simple as tweaking the wording of that. I think it's a very, I don't foresee this being a particular issue. I think it's quite a minor point. I wouldn't. It's in a member's hands if you want to change the condition, but I can see putting occupation on a larger scheme resulting in more problems than it possibly saves.
Yeah. And can you just answer a bit on perpetuity of the development essentially?
It's in members' hands, really. I
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
this
but
is
that is something we've accepted before. It's fairly standard wording we've started to adapt.
it is.
Yeah.
The only thing so the only thing I would say is that this is people's homes. And we don't normally put conditions that stop people landscaping their gardens. So there are some communal areas that we perhaps would perhaps apply that in perpetuity condition to. But it all needs, they would need planning permission to say build any new structures or any new car parking spaces in the landscaped areas. 10 years gives, I think the government guidance says 5. It might not even say 5, but 10 years gives plenty of time for it to be established and not die without someone actually taking giving it a helping hand.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Gareth, do you have a question? No, is that yeah, Councillor Waters.
I'm just going to say I fully agree with reservations of Councillor Melly as regards wording over occupation and such like, and that's from bitter experience of seeing what happened at Derwentthorpe as regards landscaping. Such wording will concentrate minds to actually get the landscaping done in a timely, sensible fashion.
Okay, my advice remains, I think it potentially holds up the occupation of houses whilst construction continues.
Yeah, I think it would strike me as unusual to essentially be a phased development. And if there'll be areas set aside for set down areas and plant areas and everything else for works. So if we ensured that all the planning was done on first occupation, we'd create a situation where they might even, it just seems unlikely for that to be common in a development. Sorry, Councillor Bassey, I'll go to you first. You had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as we're talking on condition 15, much is made in here of protecting new planting, but in the early parts of this report, more is made about the value of the site as it is now in terms of hedgerow and all of that, the habitat that it produces, that it contains. Can you clarify the hedgerow we're talking about, where we're looking on the plan? And then I'll respond to that. If I've understood correctly, the hedgerow that is referred to that is of value to biodiversity runs along the length of the back of those gardens. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's this hedgerow here.
So
there is some hedgerows here which would be removed for the replacement garden buildings, and here I can't quite recall what that's removed for the garden buildings as well. Yeah, but the significant hedgerow is this one.
So to move on from that then,
Would you like sorry, one sec.
sorry.
Did you want to come in with something there?
Sorry, keep interrupting, but I'm just wondering whether condition 11 deals with your concerns about a protection of the hedgerow. There is a condition there I've just noticed. Does that assist with you at all, councillor Vassie?
So 11 is about I guess they need to demolish the garages before you can access the hedgerow from the inside bit of the site. Condition 11 protects it and then requires a management plan prior to first occupation of the dwellings. But it will, I think it won't be as wild as it is at the moment, because it needs to be managed, and it needs to be because it'll end up being somebody's back garden hedge.
Well, my point was going to be, you did observe earlier that it's not customary to dictate how people manage vegetation in their gardens. So my question was going to be, would it be possible to require or to condition that a length along that back there was not part of people's gardens, that it was a hedge that was maintained by the applicant or whoever to ensure that it is there going forwards, and not to end up with a scheme where we've protected plants that have just been put in, but we've created a situation where all the existing hedgerow could within a year all just be taken out. So the question is, could a condition actually say that hedgerow is not part of people's gardens, it's something that's maintained as a separate asset to protect it going forwards?
So there is a requirement for a management plan. What is in that management plan is subject to negotiation. I don't think I can say that it would be for I don't know whether that would be for the housing trust or the individual householders to comply with that plan. I guess with the latter, but I
In
can't say.
terms of planning conditions, could we require that though? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because you're leaving it to future times to make decisions long after we've finished here. But we have an opportunity here to potentially protect it if the condition says the management plan has got to ensure whatever.
Well, the management plan, I think what I would say, the management plan would, to my mind, it envisage that it would say that the hedge can't be cut down and replaced by a fence, for example, and will give, normally, if we have a condition like this, it will give parameters for how it can be cut. And if it was inadvertently removed by a new resident who perhaps didn't realise what the rules were, it would have provisions for its replacement, its appropriate replacement. I think specifying who would manage it when it's effectively someone's private back garden, I mean, that might be a step beyond the planning process.
Okay. I just make the observation that once you've lost something, replacing it doesn't actually replace it. It plays at replacing it. If I've understood what the various comments are at the start from the ecologist, this is an important contributor to the biodiversity of the area. But
Yes.
I've understood the point that you made, so thank you.
Well, it doesn't. The condition doesn't, sorry, I'm gonna have to reread this. I don't want to say the condition does this or that without having read it again. So the condition, the main bulk of the condition on page 27 is the protection of the hedge during the construction process. Then flip over to page 28. That's about the management plan for the maintenance of the hedge in perpetuity, submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And so the implication there, the hedge shall be maintained in full accordance with these approved details, is that the hedge is kept.
Yeah.
And that's what the management plan will seek to achieve.
Yeah.
And the parameters why it can be, how it can be cut and managed.
Yeah.
Having it in potentially at least 12 under 12 different managers is a potential weak point, but I'm not sure we can intervene any further than what the condition suggests.
That'll be for them to clarify, won't it?
Yeah.
In the management plan they put forward to how they're going to do that. Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I get the point on here. The concern is that it says prior to the first occupation, there will be a management plan and then the hedge shall be maintained in accordance with that plan, but it doesn't specify the length of that plan. Would it be possible at the end of that paragraph to say in perpetuity, the hedge shall be maintained in full accordance with these approved details in perpetuity, to make sure that the management plan does protect it for its lifetime? It's not just there's a management plan that protects it for 2 years. Is there, you put that
It says that the management plan for the maintenance of the hedge in perpetuity at the top of page 28, so that is.
It does, yes.
That is. No, it's bigger.
It is.
I got it.
That's it. Yeah, so the management plan is the one that needs to be approved by the council, and that will have to, by this wording, be in perpetuity.
Right, Councillor Waters.
I'm glad Councillor Vassey raised all this. I would have felt more comfortable actually seeing this management plan, bearing in mind the bitter experience that we've had with Derwentthorpe and the Housing Trust's retention, shall we say, of hedgerows that were deemed important there. One particular example, if anybody ever finds the time to go and look at them, is the hedges that were bordering the Midlands estate. They were probably 6-8 foot wide. They were completely hacked back to the main stem and wooden fencing erected at the rear of the gardens. So if you're not careful, what you approve without seeing as a management plan could effectively result in the loss of certainly the ecological value of that hedgerow on one side.
Yeah. Not seeing any other hands. I'm happy to put I guess my views on the development forward. I do think, I can understand residents' concerns. It's going to be a complex process. They are essentially taking away amenity space from residents, and it's going to cause disruption. I think before these new conditions about replacement drying facilities, replacement storage buildings, this was all added, then it would have been certainly a concern. It seems like Joseph Rowntree were quite slow to the process in terms of meeting some of these concerns. But from a planning perspective, I don't see anything on the plans that wouldn't be approvable under policy. It's met every single requirement that's there. It doesn't impact on amenity from a planning perspective. It provides new affordable housing. It over provides parking, probably to a negative, but not to an extent that you'd be able to not approve it on that ground. So I don't see anything that's in here that would say I wouldn't be able to approve this application. So I think that would be the grounds that I'd be happy to support it on. Well, I'm happy to hear other people's views. Councillor Millie.
I agree with every word.
Thank you, Chair. So in principle, when I look at this, I think it looks well designed. It looks a good use of the site. There are lots of things that recommend it. Where I struggle is on issues like the one I've just raised, and also on renewable energy and cutting carbon emissions. Every single time we meet, we rehearse how much this matters and how we've got ambitions to achieve things. And then we approve plans that don't actually deliver what it is we've said we want to see. I'm disappointed because from a personal point of view, I would have hoped for more from Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust, because reputationally, they have said this matters to them. This is the kind of time when we have an opportunity to show leadership. On the issue of how you manage renewable energy and whether you have a solar club so that you share the benefits of participation. And these things have been done for 15 years and more. So I don't see why this application doesn't include that. Freiburg, the solar city in Germany, they've got a football club where they've sold all the space on the roof for solar panels, and any football club member can buy a share and benefit from being part of the renewable energy revolution. That's 18 years old. So while I see a lot to recommend this, personally, I think there are moments when planning committees have to stand up and say, as we've heard from a public speaker earlier, we've got these deadlines. They're urgent. Why would we approve buildings that we know are not committed to delivering on those deadlines? So my personal view would be to suggest we defer and allow the applicant to come back with a management plan that shows exactly how the hedges will be protected, so that there's not the risk of the things that we've heard happening in the future, that we have a plan that combines what I think is basically a good development, but with renewable energy, with a genuine commitment to cut carbon emissions. And as a general point, just to finish, I would urge the committee to do what we can to ensure that we get clearer papers going forwards. And I'm not blaming anyone for this. I think we just need to get it better going forward so that the applicant and the committee can understand what's meant in documents. When we look at this renewable energy thing and it talks about 19% of 31% of what building regs suggest, it would really help us if there was a plan showing an example of what that means for the applicant and for us, so we can see something genuine is happening. So I'd recommend personally deferral to see a better scheme.
Thanks. Yeah, just as clarification on that, while I can understand the comments, the requirement that we have as a city and being policy compliant is what's laid out there. So it would be very difficult for me to ask for more that's beyond that. But I understand entirely where you're coming from, and I get that.
To be clear, Chair, I'm not asking for more. What I'm asking for is clarity.
Yeah.
Because we've been arguing over whether the 19% is 19% of 100% or 6% of 100%. All of that becomes so opaque that I know a fair amount about this. I get completely lost. I just imagine how many people are completely lost by that and just saying, oh, we're doing something. Well, doing something is no longer enough.
I think I'm not supposed to come in at debate. I'm going to. The council has a policy which is pretty close to being adopted, and the policy is repeated in that condition. The developer hasn't made any suggestion that they can't meet what's in that policy. I don't think there are any grounds to. And the condition is also to, it's provided for that for the audience in terms of the person who's going to do the design, who will understand what that policy means. They understand what the references to the part of the building regs, target emission rates, standard assessment procedure, all those sorts of things. I don't think there's any grounds to defer it on that basis. I think that we're going I think committee will be going a step further than the policy requires, and I don't think committee should be going a step further than the policy requires when it's such a new policy and it's set out to follow in the way it's being followed here.
But yeah, I think we can provide more clarity about what that policy means for members in future for definite, but also for some background, just for the millions watching at home. it is the request that we have here in our local plan is as far as we could push it at the time, which is also disappointing. So national policy prevents us from asking for any more than that in our local plan at the time it was written, which is disappointing. Sorry, Councillor Orrell, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah. I did try and come in when Councillor Melly and Councillor Waters were talking about completed developments. House builders don't finish developments for a whole variety of reasons, sometimes good reasons, sometimes not so good reasons. So I support what Councillor Melly and Councillor Waters were saying. In terms of the development as a whole, I think the actual design and it fits in with some areas of New Earswick. There's a sort of misconception that all of New Earswick is 100-year-old houses and more. It's not correct. There are substantial areas of New Earswick that are relatively modern developments that are not old. So this would fit in with New Lodge to some extent and would be wouldn't be inappropriate in New Earswick. The parking issue and the garage issue is still problematic. It's good that the trust are now saying that residents of Garthway will be able to park in the extra spaces in the new development, so that helps a bit. The really big concern about the whole issue of the development is the loss of the 106 money. We lost the 106 money for the old school playing field development, and we're losing the 106 money for this development. Altogether, it's over £1 million. So New Earswick is losing £1 million for the future development of the area. At some point, that's going to come back to us and we'll have to find that money because it will be needed at some point in the future. So we're storing up problems for the future by not getting 106 money for these developments. It's quite clear from the report what is required in terms of sports, in terms of education, in terms of play areas, but we're not getting any of that. So it is a big worry for the future.
Thanks. Councillor Rose, I'm coming to you, Councillor Melly.
Yeah, I guess just to share my overall opinions, I echo that point. I think there's a negative on that. I think that the environmental side of things is not as good as it could be, but exceeds legal necessity, and hopefully solar following helps with that as well. And the existing residence parking concerns, etc., not ideal, but I think will be resolved outside of planning. But I think it's in keeping with the existing properties. I think that the density is good. And as was said, it does deliver what the city actually needs in terms of the types of housing and the size of housing. I think the accessibility is a good thing. I think the cycling is a good thing. I think parking is good. And we had a lot of people saying 2 spaces per property. It isn't. It's 2 spaces per the 3-bed and it's 1 space per the 2-bed. And so when you actually count for the visitor space, actually, I think it is the appropriate amount, not above concern level. And then the affordability, 100% massively exceeds the requirements as well. So, you know, I think overall that's a massive net positive over net negative when we're looking at the balance of it.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Melly, did you want to come in? Sorry, your hand.
I mean, just to say that I hear what other members of the committee have said, but you know, in terms of section 106, yeah, we've got officer opinions about what is needed in terms of services and amenities, what is needed to serve these current residents and future residents, and we rely on developers to provide that section 106 money. But there's policy that says if it makes it unviable, they don't have to pay it, and we've got to go with what policy says we're legally required to. It's disappointing, but it's what we're required to do. And same with the you know, we need a carbon neutral future, or even a carbon negative future, actually, because we've already released too much carbon, haven't we? So yeah, ideally all future, when we're looking at homes of the future, they should be carbon negative. But again, this is policy compliant. We've got policy and we're here to assess whether it meets planning policy or not. That is the extent of our powers. And in my view, this application meets all policies that we're here to assess it against, even if it's not a perfect development.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, if you'd like to move a proposal.
I wasn't about to move a proposal. I was about to just reflect on one or two things that have been said, and certainly, yes, welcome the affordability, welcome the sustainability of the location. I think, as has been expressed by others, the application could go further in a number of respects. But unless I misunderstood what Councillor Vassie was saying earlier, when he suggested a deferral, I think he was doing so, and you correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, on two grounds. One of which was the very real concern that was being expressed about the viability of the hedge to the rear of the properties. And I'm particularly concerned about that area where the space between the properties and the hedge is at a minimum, and in the middle of that development. I can't imagine just how small that back garden space would be unless the unless the hedge was trimmed back within an inch of its life at that point. Am I missing something? And if you were suggesting that we needed to see more about how that would be managed before we could feel comfortable, then I would certainly support anything that would help us to do that, or if necessary, a deferral in order to have that reassurance.
Okay. Looking for.
Chair, I think you've got a proposal and a second for deferral.
But we don't do that first. The process is we have to decide whether we pass the other thing. So we will come, if that were to come to that case. Yeah, Councillor Melly, sorry, you want to.
I'm happy to propose the officer recommendation then, but I'm open to views from other committee members on if we need to amend any of the conditions first.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth covering off the conditions. So at the moment, the main ones that we're talking about is the hedge. There is a condition about retaining it in perpetuity. Obviously, the management plan is resolved afterwards, but I think that's there. The bits that we have outstanding are new planting and whether that's in perpetuity. The challenge being some of that will be in private amenity areas, some of it will be in communal amenity areas. Now we word that, I guess, is the problem slightly there in terms of what's been proposed, although we haven't got much clarity on what the landscaping plan looks like. And then what was the second element?
It was to do with it being a pre-commencement condition or not.
Pre-commencement. I mean, I'm happy to get people's views. My view would be to leave it as it is, but if people are preoccupation, yeah. But I'm happy to put a vote on that if people are very specific on it, I guess.
If it helps members, the applications of the Planning Committee A on the 1st of August, the landscaping scheme was required to be implemented within a period of 6 months of the substantial completion of the development or the related phase of the development where applicable. So personally, I think this scheme is too small to be split into phases. So I would say that my advice remains that we stick with the recommended condition in terms of the trigger point is appropriate for this scheme.
Thanks. Councillor Melly.
So my concern, Chair, is just when planning approval is approved, it doesn't have to be developed in full. It could be partially developed. If in the future it transpired that actually maybe one of the smaller blocks of garages needed to be retained to meet need, then that could mean that this development would never be completed, and this condition that the planning authority would never have the power to actually, impose this condition because it.
I think I would say you have to look at what's reasonable, and part of what's reasonable is what is likely. Is it likely that people are going to move into and be happy moving into plots that are not completed, with the landscaping not completed? So you have to judge that element of reasonableness, really. Is it necessary to hold up the occupation of part of the site because it's possible that it won't be built out to completion?
So we've just heard that given the size of this development, it's unlikely to be in phases. It's likely to be done in one go. And in terms of people being willing to move in before the landscaping's done, yeah, people are really desperate for housing. People are willing to live in all sorts of horrendous conditions because they have no other option. And if people are on a housing waiting list and they're offered something and they turn it down, they are then removed from the housing waiting list. They lose their right to social housing. So yeah, if people are offered a house, they will take it because they are absolutely, like, they have no other choice.
Okay, it's in members' hands. I really think it's unreasonable. That is my advice.
Is the wording substantial as it stands here? Sorry, I haven't got it.
The wording is practical completion.
Could we add the word substantial like they have? Which essentially what that is saying is that if you just leave a little bit off the end, but for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's a development that people live in. It's easier for the council to argue that case, isn't it? You know, you need something that is just purely completed. It's just a tweak of wording, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't have any further advice.
It's
such a small issue that on a 14-house development,
Yeah.
I can't see it being an issue, but you are the local planning authority and decision makers for this. I can't offer any more advice than I have done already.
Like Kelvin said, to take about on the specific word, to take about on the specific word of whether that is
At the commencement or whether we take it there. So if people would like to change the wording, then please raise your hand.
So changing it to prior to
Prior to
occupation rather than
occupation,
successful completion.
yeah. Please raise your hand for that. And those who are against changing the wording, preoccupation. No.
Sorry.
We're asking, would you like, so essentially this is around when is the tree planting going to take place in the condition? Whether that is required before the first occupation of any house on development, or is it within 6 months of completion of the development? That is the question. But if it were to be approved, that is the question. So I'm going to abstain. Okay, and so at the moment we have 2, 4. Is that correct? Okay, so we will be asking for that to be changed if this is to be approved. 3
Within a period of 6 months of the first occupation.
That would be more comfortable. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do we have a seconder for the proposal? I think we only have a proposer so far.
Oh, we haven't discussed the 10 years thing, have we?
What's that?
Did we discuss the 10 years bit before we?
I mean,
Second,
the advice is that it's going to be extremely complicated to manage that across the scheme in 10 years is what we've used on other residential developments. Is that right? Or what's your view?
Advice you've been given before is it's unreasonable within the curtilage of residential plots.
Well, can't you just separate it then as to the amenity areas?
Yeah.
You know, if you see on the photo, you've 2 liquid ambers there that won't have even been in 10 years that's getting rived out. You know, what's to say in another 5 years, some other bright spark comes up with some other form of development or wants to increase car parking, in which case we've just wasted our time with the landscaping.
Yeah. Well, I guess what you could just to move it along, it might be reasonable to condition the areas forward of the dwelling houses. How about that?
Good.
Forward of the front wall of the dwelling houses.
Yeah. That is.
And that's within in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So if they have to come back, if they want to remove the trees and seek approval.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Rose, you got your hand up. But, would anyone like to second the proposal with the additional changes to the conditions that we now have? Okay, I will second that we move this to a vote on draft recommendation. Please, Gareth, could you take us through the recommendation as it currently stands?
Okay, so the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the prior completion of the legal agreement that's set out on page 24 and in the update, subject to the conditions as varied by and added to by the written update, with the amendments to condition 15 regarding completion of landscaping screen before first occupation and the retention of trees and plants forward to the front wall of the dwellings in perpetuity.
Thank you.
That's it, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry, just try to be, before we vote, try to be clear on that second part. So the dwellings all have their own kind of front area within their curtilage, but forward of the wall. So would that be included?
But it was forward of the front wall, so I would say, so that retains the street trees, I guess you'd call them, although they're not in the street as such.
So is that area where you're showing with the cursor, that would be within the curtilage of the dwellings rather than adopted highway? Is that right?
Yeah. I'm not saying, we've taken the view in the past that it's unreasonable, but we've never, it's not unlawful to put such a condition on. So my recommendation, so we actually get to a point where we're voting on a decision, is that is I think that's a reasonable condition given the concern that members have.
Okay. On that basis of what we've just been told, can I see hands for all those who are in favour for approving the officer recommendation as outlined there, please? And all those who are against? And all those who abstain? Okay, in that case, the officer's recommendation is not moved. What's that? Approved, yeah, sorry, it's not approved. So what time are we on? I'm going to propose we take a small break. Oh, we can't in the middle of this, can we? Right, we'll carry on. So let's crack on. So I'm going to ask people for their views on what they would like to propose as an alternative for approval. Yes, Councillor Orrell, please.
I think there's so many things that we're not sure about this application that I think deferral is the right way to go forward. Not against the development, but there are so many loose ends that we need to sort out in terms of the hedges, in terms of the parking, in terms of what Councillor Bassey raised about sustainability, that we need to bring those back to a future meeting.
Yeah, Councillor Rose.
It meets parking policy, it meets ecological climate policy. The hedgerow is going to be dealt with via the management plan. I don't see a single ground for deferral from all the conversation we've had. There are things that need resolving after the fact that are in the conditions to be resolved after the fact. Personally, I think it would be ludicrous for us to defer or reject. We can make further condition changes. I'm very happy to look at something, but I don't know why we would defer it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ditto the same points. Councillor Melly, and then I'll come to Councillor Bassey.
I agree entirely with Councillor Rowe.
Councillor Bassey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, here's my problem. We come here to make determinations of things that are put in front of us. And too much of this, we're told, oh, it'll be done later. Oh, it will be done. And yes, it will comply. But surely there comes a point where the relevance of us sitting around here on a planning committee is to consider what's put in front of us and to have to be given the information that enables us to make an informed choice. What frustrates me about this is that on hedges, on sustainability, on planting, on things like that, we're told, well, it'll all be done later, and if it doesn't, then we'll do this. That is why I've recommended deferral. I'm quite sure that the applicant is able to put forward all that stuff that's required. What frustrates me is sitting at this table month in, month out and being given things where we're not actually told this is what's being proposed. I want to be able to make a judgment and to use the energies and skills that I've developed over the years, as the rest of us have, to make a decision over a more complete proposal than we've got here. And it relates to the hedges, as we've said. It relates to the renewable energy. I'd like to see what is proposed. I don't want to take everything on what will be done later, because ultimately the challenges are now. So I'm quite happy to listen to officers' recommendations as to how we phrase that in order to get an application that comes before us that has a fuller expression of what it is we're being asked to approve.
Okay, I mean, and just draw us back to the fact that this is universally how development works in terms of every planning application that comes before us normally has the same conditions as this to an extent. And we aren't going to fix that by deferring this one application. This will, the same thing, these conditions will return on every future application that we deal with. And these things, I don't see how challenging this resolves that problem in the future going forwards. We will get some details they could submit to say, but that is all I will say.
Can I just respond quickly, Chair? Because other people have done this longer than I have, but I've certainly sat on planning committees for 10 years and more. In the past, it wasn't considered beyond the pale to defer something and ask for further information. It was accepted that the planning committee formed the view that they wanted more information in order to make a decision. I don't see why that is considered out of order or threatening. It isn't saying no to the application. It is simply saying we require more information.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Our role here isn't whether we like it or not. It isn't whether we are happy with planning policy, whether we want to hope things change in the future that make us be able to reject it in the future. And it's not to hope that the solar panels suddenly end up on it. What we've got is the planning application in front of us, which doesn't include solar panels. Now we can aspire and hope that it doesn't end up on there anyway, but that's not what's in front of us. The only thing that we haven't got the clarity on, if you like, outside of things we want in policy, is the bit around the hedge. But what is here is that there will be a management plan to protect that hedge in perpetuity, and we have to leave it to council officers to make sure that the management plan does do that. But what we've agreed here is that it must be, and it must be looked after. And for me, that's the only thing we could defer on, whether if we need to have all of the management plan in full in advance, but I haven't heard of that happening before. So I just don't know what grounds we'd be deferring on. Deferring in general, if we haven't got the information, absolutely, but we aren't waiting for the information whether solar panels are on there or not. They're not. Maybe they will add them later, but that's my resistance to deferral, if you like. I wouldn't resist defer in other circumstances, but
I'm going to look to some advice around grounds for deferral based on lack of information, which is essentially what's being proposed here by members.
If officers thought there was not enough information to get to the point of making a recommendation, we wouldn't have brought the application to committee. The conditions are absolutely standard for this type of development. We wouldn't expect the development, the planning application process would grind to a complete halt if we required the level of detail of all the management plans, everything to be submitted to the point where members deal with the application. It's not a new thing. It's the way the systems always worked, that things that aren't so crucial to be dealt with at the decision stage can be dealt with by condition. That's what the law allows us to do. That's what guidance allows us to do. Practically, I don't know, without them taking the garages down, whether they can make an assessment of the hedge at this point anyway, because it's right up to the back of those garages. And they can't demolish the garages without the planning permission. So, I mean, I'm throwing it out there. I don't know if that's the case or not, whether they can make an assessment of the hedge, but it wouldn't be it doesn't strike me as something that we would normally require the information up front when that information can be secured by condition.
Thanks.
It's not unlawful. It's not unlawful.
Yeah. Councillor Belly.
I agree to a certain extent that it's always useful to have more information. I always end up asking a lot of questions and making these meetings probably longer than they need to be because I'm asking for more information because we're not provided it up front. But in this case, I think we do have enough information to make a determination. I don't see what information could possibly be provided by the applicant that would tip the planning balance so that we wouldn't approve it when it came back. If we don't approve it now, I think it would be approved in future. Anyway, I share the concerns about the hedge. It doesn't seem very practical to maintain it in perpetuity if it's going to be in about 12 different people's back gardens, and as you said, very small back gardens. But that is controlled by condition, that there has to be a real plan of how to maintain that hedge in perpetuity. And if one can't be provided, then the development can't go ahead. So all the concerns that I feel, are the arguments for deferral, I feel actually can be controlled by condition. And even if they couldn't be, it wouldn't actually, for me, tip the planning balance that much that I wouldn't vote the same next time for approval anyway.
Yeah. Councillor Orrell.
Back to what Gareth said just now. Would the trust need permission to take down the garages? Can they do that without planning permission?
No, they are probably of a size which means that planning permission would be required for their demolition. Although I don't have the volume.
If they could take them down, they could examine the hedge and see about the viability for the future of the hedge. It could be that when the garages are demolished, the hedge might be damaged. So we need some sort of, if they can take them down now and examine them, that would.
Yeah, I don't think they can without planning permission. And there are always what ifs, but we can't, we just can't close them all off. It's not within the scope of the development of the planning system to cover absolutely everything like that. So no, I didn't have an article on that.
That's fine. I don't see my proposal. I don't see a way out of this without. I mean, we've had a proposer and a seconder for deferral, so I don't see a route out of this without taking that to a vote to test it, whether that is a willingness, or do you see an alternative?
Well, it wasn't. I don't think there was any.
Not. Yeah, we would have to go back to request that.
There are a number of things covered.
Yeah.
Which we haven't.
Yeah, we'd have to discuss.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think, unless someone has an alternative proposal, I think the request I'm looking for is, unless you wish to change your mind and you wish to propose approval. Councillor Cullick, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not trying to be difficult in any way. I lean very much to approving this, and whilst I share the things that have been articulated by Councillor Vassy in terms of it would be good to know, I don't share the view that without that it's not possible to approve an application. They're not, to my mind, grounds for refusing or not approving this application. My one sticking point is just to be reassured as much as I can be that this doesn't effectively destroy the hedge that's there. Because the NPPF requires planning decisions, I'm looking at page 20, minimizing impacts on providing net gains of biodiversity. This advice in relation to trees, protected species and habitats, etc., where it retains trees and hedgerows. And as I look at the drawings, the properties, particularly in the middle of that arc, sorry, I'm moving away from the microphone. The properties, particularly in the middle of that arc of the development, seem to me to be so close to what is a broad hedge that, particularly with the building of those stores at the back, could effectively destroy the hedge that's there. And I just want to be reassured sufficiently that in approving this, we're not actually going to be guilty of difficult.
Yeah, you go.
It's such a long time ago. Condition. Condition 21. So condition 11 protects the hedge from during construction. And then it requires it to be retained and managed in accordance with a plan. Condition 21. So the stores are very close. So condition 21 was amended so we can, when the garages come down, we can agree with the developer where those stores are precisely located so that we don't impact on the integrity of retaining the hedge for its full length. So that's a further safeguard there. I think, I mean, the hedge is massive because it's in a place where it's been allowed to get massive because it doesn't matter if it's massive. But the hedgerow exists along the back of all those properties for the whole length of, as far as I'm aware, from the whole length of that New Earswick boundary with the stray. So here's the hedge behind the bungalows. It's managed. It's not as unruly. It does get very close to the back of the bungalows. You can see how the road tapers. So it's not different to what has been approved and what appears to work elsewhere in the vicinity, but it won't be what's there at the moment. We know that the ecologist knew that when she asked for the conditions, and the landscape architect knew that the hedge was going to be managed, and the development would be, because the hedge would be lower, would be more apparent from the stray and those views across the stray. So all those things are known, and your officers haven't, those technical officers haven't recommended that the scheme be altered to give more space to the hedge.
Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. Essentially, what we're being told is this is all code for the hedge will be lost. What exists there will be lost. It will be cut down. Well, we are being told that it will be cut down. We've heard from Councillor Waters of previous applications where hedges have been said they'd be kept and then they're reduced to just a central stick and a fence. I just want to be clear that when we say, well, the hedge is currently massive, we're saying, well, it could be a lot smaller. When we say it's unruly, we're saying it needs tidying up. All of that means, in terms of biodiversity, that that hedge will not be the resource it is. So others will make the determination they want, but I have to be clear. My conscience is that I won't vote for it because I do not see any reassurance to me that biodiversity will be protected as things stand and as this is put in front of us. So that's my response.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, so I guess just to clarify the point there, which we haven't got a map version of, but you can see it on the corner of the map just there, it tapers inwards. So the last house actually has, the house backs into the hedge. The one next to it has sort of 3 meters of garden. The one next to that is about 5-6 meters. So that is protected, the hedge is protected. And my understanding of what we've got in front of us is that it would be unlawful for them not to retain the hedge. But we can add an extra edit to the condition to say, you know, not just for the maintenance of the hedge in perpetuity, but for the maintenance of the hedge to X standard in perpetuity. If we want to make a condition, I'm very happy to talk about improving the condition to say that the hedge must be maintained to its biological, I don't know what the right wording would be, but I'd much rather us find a condition to take us beyond this point where we can trust officers that it has to, whatever they put in the management plan, it has to meet our standards, not just that there is a management plan. That seems better to me than deferral personally, if you can find common wording.
I would agree. I think the wording, I'd like to say, so for some clarity, there are houses further outside of that shop where the hedge is closer to the house than it likely is to be on the actual development that we're talking about here as a proposed development. So it does become very close while remaining a very large, thick hedge. But I agree, finding wording that would happily reassure members that this is going to remain a hedge of suitable condition is reasonable. But I don't know what your view on what that wording would be, which is a challenge for you. I haven't had a chance to look at it.
Well, we have, I don't know whether they've been through committee, but we have put conditions on that require hedgerows to be kept not cut below a certain height in the past. So that's something we have, that's something we used. Whether the hedge, whether the substantial height of the hedge is an issue.
Can we have?
But then you have to be reasonable about how.
Yeah, could we take something
It has to be maintainable by the
height and width, but we're going to have to be agreed the exact wording between
I don't know what the width.
chair and vice chair as
Yeah.
to what that exact wording is. I think is an approach that we could take.
May I propose that only if the chair and vice chair are happy on the wording, it doesn't defer? Is that something we're allowed to?
Well, we'd be changing it to an approval, but with the change wording, yeah, essentially.
Yeah, but it would have to be wording that you both be comfortable with.
Yeah,
which then
that's right.
puts
Yeah.
the
So we
ball in
know
court.
broadly what that was, but with the exact wording to be agreed. Yeah.
So that's a wording which helps inform what the management plan
Yeah.
eventually says when worked on by the applicant.
Correct. Yeah. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Just another example that you might be more familiar with, Victoria Way. There was a line of garages there up until probably 10 years ago. Similar sort of outgrown hedge. There was some more houses shoehorned into where the garages were. And I challenge any of you to go around there and tell me where there is hedge now.
Thanks. Right. At the moment, I have a proposer for this with the change wording. Would anyone like to second that proposal?
Can we just be clear what?
Yeah,
the change wording is,
we'll
please?
ask Gareth to take us through what we're currently looking at. Just for a second. Could you take us through how you want to fully propose that, and then we'll
What's how members want to.
Well, members, how you've
propose it,
currently got that written
what
down
I've
is what you're
taken
putting
from
forward.
members,
Yes, yeah.
is to agree a form of words for the condition to inform the management plan regarding height and the width of the retained hedge. The wording to be agreed with chair and vice chair.
Thanks. Okay, I mean, that sounds reasonable to me.
Does it include the other changes we discussed earlier?
Yeah, with the changes that we included there. Yeah, that is fine. Okay, in that case, sorry, Councillor Vassey.
Can I just ask for some clarification here? When we look at the plans and we look at that image, to make sure that we know what we're talking about. So on the image that's got the orange and the blue houses, if you can show us that, Gareth. So the property right at the bottom, if I've understood it correctly, below the blue property, is the property shown to have an irregular garden of exactly the same shape on the picture with the vegetation. Is that correct? It's the one next to that V shape of garages. Yeah. So that's the same building. So to be clear about what we're talking about, if we look at the length of the garden of that last property at the bottom, and we look at it on the picture with the vegetation, they do have a bit of tall hedge there. But when we look at the plans for the orange house and the blue house in the middle, the garden that is provided for them is less than half of the size of that garden. So essentially, if I've understood, tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, the garages that appear embedded in the hedge further up are probably about the same distance from where the end of the garden will be as we're seeing as the houses will be. So that those two garages that are partially lost in the hedge are where, yes, are roughly in line with the end of the boundary and where these projected houses will be situated. Does that make sense? Is that correct? If I'm correct, what that's the reason I'm saying that is what it suggests to me is that either the whole of the hedge disappears or the people who are going to move into those houses don't have a garden, they just have a hedge. Yeah.
Yeah, which is essentially the arrangement along the way. Along with that.
There's, I go right back to the presentation here. So there is no, the development of 14 affordable houses will not result in the hedge as it stands at the moment being retained. It can't happen that way because there's not enough space on site for that. So there is a balance. There's a planning balance between the provision of affordable housing and the loss of some of that hedge. That's a decision members have to make. The site doesn't allow for both to take place, and that's an officers, the ecologist, landscape and countryside officer, landscape architect, planning officers have put that in the balance, and that's the recommendation in front of you. I don't think with the scheme in front of you, there is not the retention of the hedge as you see it, as it stands at the moment. That's a straight choice.
That's the information. Okay, we've had to run through the recommendation. I won't make you repeat it for the time. So, how did you discuss it? Do you want to run through the recommendation as proposed?
No,
We've heard it. Yes,
I haven't
yeah.
added to what I mentioned before.
Right, yes.
So that's the chair and the vice chair.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. So with the new wording, including height and width to the wording as agreed with the chair and vice chair, can I see those who are, and the previous condition just changed to the risk before?
Who seconded that proposal?
I thought that had been moved and seconded before.
They've been proposed but not seconded, and
I
I'm
see.
conscious we have a,
Seconder, sorry, yeah.
I'm conscious we've got a deferral proposal and seconder, and if one of them would like to second this instead, it would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, would anyone like to second this proposal? No, I thought we did have
To do deferral.
We did have a seconder.
I put my hand up at the time, but I don't think I was.
We thought that was the seconder, that was the confusion. Okay, right, no worries.
Fine, I'll second it.
But with a change to the condition. Yeah, that is the current position. Sorry, so we have had, but that wasn't a seconding. So would anyone like to second that proposal? It can be anyone. Yeah.
Don't ask.
We had a proposer and a deferrer in the first stage. Sorry, would anyone like that?
Chair, was that, I can't now recall whether the proposal to defer was seconded.
I mean, it was seconded, but not, was it? That wasn't during this stage of discussion, I guess is the issue, but.
It was proposed and seconded.
We thought, okay, right, if you'd like. Yeah, could you remind, if you would still like to do that, can someone who the proposer and the seconder still redo that, please?
And for what?
Oh, here's. It has been proposed, hasn't it, Chair? So isn't it that we next have to vote on that, and if that falls, then.
Yeah, okay. So if that's, so you'd like to vote, but who seconded that? Sorry, so you proposed.
I believe that I seconded it. We then moved to the stage where we were looking for the reasons for deferral, and the advice that was being given is we would struggle for
Yeah,
reasons. for
that was my
deferral.
view on
So we
this.
never then put it to the vote.
Yeah,
Instead, we segued into slightly changing
yeah,
the wording, but we didn't vote on the deferral. I would still like us to test that deferral. I find myself insufficiently reassured at this point, slightly by what is proposed with the change of wording, but I'm struggling. So I'd like the committee to test the deferral.
Good question, Chair.
what, okay, for the people who would like to propose and second the deferral, can you outline the grounds for that deferral, please?
My grounds of referral, I referred to this in the conversation, were with what is to my mind, complete loss of the biodiversity value of that hedge through a substantial part of the proposed development. And needing to be reassured in terms of actually having sight of the management that would be proposed by the developer to retain sufficient of that hedge that would be compatible with the development proposed.
Okay. Just all that. Yes. Yeah. Nice. Do you want to pass a view on that?
No, that's clear.
Okay, that's clear. Okay.
Just a question
Yeah.
for clarity.
Yeah.
Can deferral be, I don't know what the right phrase is, challenged after the fact, the way that a rejection would be? What are the consequences for deferral?
They only in terms of an appeal for non-determination. Which has its own time limits. With an application as old as this, I'm not quite sure where the time limits come in. for this one, but that would be the challenge.
Because I was just trying to understand if we deferred and the grounds were deemed to not be valid by a higher power or whatever the right phrasing is, what the consequences would be.
Yeah, ultimately the developer can appeal under non-determination, and an inspector would consider how reasonable conditions to get over to mitigate harm would be. So,
Chair, just to add, I think that there could also be, although there could be, as Gareth says, an appeal against non-determination, and so therefore the planning inspector would then have the jurisdiction over the application.
yes.
Additionally, or alternatively, in theory, an appellant or an applicant could bring a judicial challenge for judicial review on the ground that the officer decision was manifestly unreasonable, perverse, not Wednesday reasonable.
Councillor Bassey.
And as another alternative, the applicant might simply come forward with a revised plan, so we all knew where we were with the hedges.
Yeah. Okay, so the proposal and seconded item here is to defer on those grounds. Can you quickly just run through that before we take a vote? So I'm just trying to make sure we're being very clear at this stage.
So my understanding is the deferral is regarding concern of the loss of biodiversity value of the hedge, and members wish to see the management plan that the developer would put forward in order to overcome that concern.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, can I see hands for those who are for moving the decision to defer the application? And those who are against? In that case, we have 5 for deferral. So the application will be deferred and will return to committee at a later date unless one of the other options ahead of this happens. I'm going to take a short break there for 5 minutes, so people can get silent, and then we'll move on to the next application. Thanks for everyone's time so far. If anyone would like to leave now is the time between the 2 applications. So thank you. All right, we will move on to the next application, but this will be applications in terms of presentation. So we're going to take items 4B and 4C together in terms of presentations and questions, and then there will be 2 individual votes at the end of that process for each individual application. Gareth, could you take us through the 2 applications?
Thank you, Chair. So we have a planning application for an ultra rapid charging hub. With 8 charging units under a canopy with solar panels, associated battery storage and substation. And then we have a second application for advertisements relating to the charging hub. Quickly, if I've gone through the drawings at the same time. So the site is Union Terrace car park. The aerial photograph. Photographs from Clarence Street. So the frontage of the site. Within the site, members will notice the blue badge, disability, disabled persons parking area as it stands at the moment. And this is the current layout. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 disabled persons parking spaces. It's a proposal. So here's the charging hub under the canopy. The associated infrastructure that's required. The proposed relocated blue badge parking. The layout showing the eight bays underneath the canopy. Canopy details. Another example that has been laid out before. The compound layout. And the proposed advertisements. So there's there are 2 signs, lettering only to be illuminated, and then the display of the price to be charged for the charging. So the smaller totem in that location, just on the inside of the entrance to the site, and the larger totem sits back onto the fencing compound. So the site is outside the conservation area. The conservation area boundary runs along the back of the properties in Claremont Terrace, and then and down Clarence Street. The application was deferred from the meeting on the 19th of October 2022 for the reasons set out in paragraphs 1.4 and 1.5 of the report on page 50. The applicant's submission following that deferral is set out in 1.6 to 1.9 of the report. And then there's a further update table before members, the report from the meeting between the applicants and the York Access Forum, which took place on the 7th of May this year. That's the end of the presentation. If members have any questions on the plans, although
yeah, Councillor Millie.
The current pedestrian access to the southeast, is that changing as part of this, part of these plans?
It's not shown to be close enough.
Thanks. Not seeing, sorry. Councillor Rose, questions on the plans?
Yeah, the question is the small totem. I'm just trying to understand it. Obviously, there's the picture of it on that sign there, but that rapid left, ultra rapid right, that doesn't in my brain tally with what I can see on here. So can you clarify what I'm getting confused about? Is it the light blue on the map?
Yes.
Yeah, well, what's the ultra rapid pointing to? If the rapid's pointing to that, are they the light blue ones on the other plan? If you go to the bird's eye updated plan site, so that small totem is the one on the entrance.
Yeah.
Is it the two light blue bits further up to the top left that are the two ultra rapids, as opposed to it being under the roof? Is that what those are pointing to? Or is there a different ultra rapid that I'm getting confused about, or
There's
is
a-
it one?
Yeah, it's probably better if.
We,
It's
the
11
next,
detail.
the next speaker will be the applicant. So I propose that we save this
If
question.
we're not certain, that's obviously just clarifying
no,
what's in
that's
the
fine.
plan.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'll move to the speaker, the only speaker we have on this one, which is Stuart Andrews, project manager, speaking in support. If you could join us, please, Stuart. You'll have heard before tonight, and sorry if you wait, but you've got 3 minutes, and then there'll be questions if there are any questions afterwards. Do you want a warning when there's 30 seconds left, or?
That should be all right.
Okay, thanks.
So thanks for seeing me again. I'd just like to make two points here based on the previous deferment, just to highlight a couple of things. We've very recently in the council approved our local transport strategy. There are a couple of lines from transport strategy that seem very relevant to what we're discussing today. Local transport vision is for an accessible, affordable, sustainable and resilient transport network, city and city centre. There's also reference in there to incentivising EV as replacement to internal combustion engine vehicles. Those 4 statements were very relevant to what's going on today. When we last spoke to you, this was deferred on the grounds that the proposed movement of the disabled parking bays from the front of the site further into the car park didn't conform to what is the inclusive mobility guidance for accessible parking, accessible facilities. The other set of guidance related to this development is PAS 1899, the accessible charging guidance. I'd just like to make everyone aware that the exact same guidance on the location of the parking spaces applies to any accessible charging as well. And PAS 1899 section 7.4, distance to venue, proximity of charge points for disabled people should be given the same consideration as designated accessible parking as per inclusive mobility. It also says that charge points should be in a prominent, visible location in close proximity to the venue or access to the car park. This is exactly the same guidance that relates to the parking. And what I'd just like to urge the committee to consider today is to consider this development as a whole piece of work rather than taking elements in isolation, because it's impossible to meet both these conditions. Both of these things cannot be at the closest point to the car park entrance. The second thing I'd just like to bring up is the Equalities Act, section 20. We have a duty to anticipate ways in which disabled people are placed at substantial disadvantage accessing services and to take reasonable steps to avoid this. Now, we anticipated in 2019 that this would be an issue, which is why the first 2 high pubs were built with accessibility in mind. When we came to you with these plans last time, this is also built into our designs. The high pub was designed to be a fully accessible facility for everyone. We're now in 2024, and I work with Motability. I work with a number of different groups who are campaigning for accessible charging. It hasn't happened. To date, there are 0 PAS compliant sites in the whole of the UK, not one. And we have no accessible charging facility at all in the city centre currently. To put this in place would be a real win in terms of disabled drivers, and it would be showing that we're leading the way. No other authority has this. This is a real first. Okay. So I just urge you to sort of consider this as a win-win.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? We'll have at least one. Does anyone raise a hand? Do you want to ask the question? Councillor Rose.
That question I asked before, please.
Signage. The example signage is actually from Monk's Cross. We didn't have the budget to pay a graphics designer to redo the graphics, so it's been reused as an example. We would simply change the directions. We would also we haven't decided firmly which side would have the rapid and ultra rapid chargers. They are different size units. It would all be, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Oh, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the local transport strategy is one of the differentiators between when it came last time and when it comes this time, but I just guess I'm calling out in the local transport strategy update, it also explicitly talks about the hierarchy of users. So it starts with people with protected characteristics who are pedestrians, wheelchair users, wheelers, etc. Then cyclists, then public transport users, then disabled car drivers, then powered two-wheelers, then commercial and business units, and then car drivers. And the reason it was rejected last time around was that question over the sort of hierarchy of disabled car drivers going past that entrance way into the site versus the car drivers using that site. Have you got any comment on whether anything has changed from your perspective around that specific reason it was?
We've looked at a number of design options. We cannot fit in the charging bays without displacing something. Either the parking or the charging bays have to move. We're very limited what we can do with the charging setup because it all has to fit under the canopy. It's the way the grant funding is established. It has to be in close proximity to the power supply, to the battery. When we start moving further into the site, again, it's not PAS compliant. We're not now at the nearest point. We're making people using the charging facility, disabled drivers then have to walk the full length of the car park. We're also getting into an area of the car park where it narrows, and we reach a point where we have to remove pedestrian walkways, and then we get down to single file traffic. And at that point, traffic manoeuvres around the car park become dangerous to every pedestrian and a lot of other drivers as well. So we couldn't realistically find a position for the hub deeper into the car park. So we're left with the same option, which is to relocate the parking. And as I tried to explain my original point, accessible parking and charging bays have exactly the same priority and exactly the same guidelines for where they're placed. We cannot meet both unless you consider it as an encompassing thing. One thing I would like to mention is one of the original designs included running those disabled parking bays down the back of the electrical compound, but it meant we had to reduce the number to 5. And this was rejected originally because we were told we had to maintain the original 7, a like-for-like replacement. It is a better option. I know there were concerns about unloading, say, a wheelchair into what is the main access road into the car park. If it would be a possibility, we could still revert to what was option 2 presented originally, which was to have 5 spaces, but in a much preferable position in terms of unloading bays at the rear of the parking.
Yeah. Just in regards to questions, if there's any technical questions related to charging infrastructure that you were hoping to ask towards officers, now would also be a better time to ask them, I'm told, if there are questions related to charging infrastructure as well. Yes, Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the photograph on page 68. Are the canopies under the trees?
No, there's sufficient room to get the canopy in without the tree covering the canopy. In future years, it may require trimming back, but there is sufficient room currently to allow it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other questions, and Councillor Rose, that's the question I was planning to ask myself. So if you want to take a seat at the back, we'll continue with the discussions. So we'll just check, is there any further questions for officers before we progress with this? Don't see anything. So Councillor Melly, you have a hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on the committee last time this came to committee, and there was something at the time about the reason why the blue badge parking couldn't remain where it is and this development be slightly further back was to do with it needing to be kind of gated off controlled access in the future, but I couldn't see any mention of that in this application. Is that still the case?
That's a standard question to ask.
Yeah, I didn't put my hand up in time.
I don't know that. I was at the meeting. Would you like to answer?
Chair, you could use your discretion here.
Yeah, I'm willing to use my discretion in this case, if you'd like to return to the table. on this case to us?
So this scheme's been rolling around for quite some time, and when it was first developed, one of the other transport schemes that was ongoing was putting ANPR cameras and pay on exit schemes on certain car parks. I think it's only ended up being done at Marygate, but in the instance that this became any kind of pay on exit car park with ANPR technology, if the hyper was moved deeper into the car park with parking spaces in front of it, it would create a situation where people entering the hyper would be charged for parking, even though we don't charge for parking on rapid chargers. and we'd end up with a split situation where you wouldn't be able to program a pay on exit system to recognise who was charging and who wasn't. It's one thing we looked at Marygate, and it wasn't feasible at Marygate to do that.
Thanks. Did you have a question?
So it's to do with. No, sorry, sorry, I didn't completely understand that. So the reason why it couldn't be moved back slightly to the west to retain the accessible parking where it is currently is to do with retaining the possibility of ANPR in the future.
It was one consideration out of many, in that it made doing pay on exit or ANPR systems extremely difficult to put a hub with no parking fees on it within the boundary of the ANPR cameras for a pay on exit system. It was just one of many considerations. It was not the only reason we can't do this. The main reason is PAS 1899 says we shouldn't do it. The car park isn't wide enough to do it, and we moved too far away from the power supply to do it. Those are the top sort of three reasons.
So where is the power supply?
It's in that electrical compound, which would run approximately level with the start of the standard parking bays on that picture.
Could officers show us where that is?
Okay, any amendments? Thank you. Don't think there were any further questions, so we will move forward into discussion on the item. I can't see anyone who'd like to take it forward. Councillor Cullick.
Thank you. I wasn't part of the earlier consideration of this item, but I can understand how it's impossible to satisfy two things at the same time, which are going to be contradictory. I would be more than happy to support this. I think it's a vital element of your rolling out the technology which we so desperately need across the city in a systematic way. I'll be, if we have the opportunity, more than willing to propose that we approve.
Thanks. I should just clarify, I'll be asking for proposals and seconders for item 4B, which is the main parking and design arrangements first. Councillor Rose.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just to support this, I can see that it's previously been deferred and everything's been looked at again. I'm satisfied with the answers that have been given as to why we are where we are. When I saw the photograph, I too was a little bit concerned, and is this going to be under the trees? I'm satisfied with the answer. I would just note that if we were in France, the trees would be pollarded regularly, and it would be easier to be confident that there's not going to be shadowing over them. But in reality, if one car a day is charged as a result of power coming off the panels, that'll probably be it. The rest of it's coming from elsewhere. But it nonetheless is important that we make that move. So I just welcome this. I'm pleased to see it, and happy to propose or second or support.
Yeah, Councillor Rose, sorry, and unless people have got other things to add, then I'm happy to.
I have mixed opinions, and I'm not convicted either way on it. I totally appreciate the sort of, it's not necessarily a catch-22 that we're in, but the challenge in trying to meet both sides of the fence. We don't have anywhere in the city centre where, you know, if you are disabled and have an electric car, you can get proper parking. That is obviously a problem that needs to be addressed. What we're doing here, though, is we're giving the priority to disabled drivers who are able to have an electric car. And, you know, there is no easy way of giving both, right? It can't be done. I totally get that. But are we going to price out people from having the priority spaces? I understand the challenges that were said around not being able to have the disabled non-electric spaces within the same area for a variety of reasons, including, you know, the kind of parking gating. But it does fill me with discomfort that we're going to be facing this choice here and in future on which type of driver would we like to have the better, the more accessible spaces, the shorter distance to travel. And in this case, we're saying, well, because all the other places, people who aren't in electric cars don't get the priority, for this one, we're going to give them the priority. It fills me with discomfort around how this decision has to be made. I don't necessarily oppose it, but I don't know if I can support it when we're putting disabled drivers in the middle of a car park. It's not an ideal plan, but I don't necessarily have a suggestion for how to make it ideal. That's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Malley, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the time that officers have put in. You know, we deferred it so that this could be looked at again, and it sounds like they really have. And I appreciate the time that's gone into doing that to try and find alternatives and consult more widely. But this is very close to, if not exactly the same application that we looked at last time, and my opinion hasn't changed. It moves the blue badge parking to significantly further away from their destination, whatever the destination is, whether it's a property off Gillygate or the city centre or the university or the Groves, whatever it is, it moves it further away from the destination, significantly further away, like close to 50 metres, which is the limit that some people have for how far they can travel. It means that people who need rear access to their vehicle, if they have a ramp out the rear of their vehicle, it moves their parking from the area of the car park, which probably has the lowest level of traffic, to the area that has the highest volume of traffic. It means that for pedestrians who want to use the pedestrian access at the south of the site onto Gillygate, they, again, instead of walking through an area of the lowest volume of traffic, they'll be walking through an area with much more manoeuvring going on because it will be the charging hub. And considering we have a transport hierarchy, like electric vehicle charging is incredibly important. All of the surrounding area here, it's my ward, I know it very well, it's all terrace streets where it's very difficult for people who own electric vehicles to charge at home. For other accessibility reasons, you know, cables training across pavements and stuff. And so more electric vehicle charging is needed, including blue badge parking. But that is still we have a transport hierarchy which puts pedestrians and disabled people above private vehicles, whether they're electric or petrol or hybrid or diesel. And this just goes against the transport hierarchy in that way. And so I can't support it. I know that might mean, that could mean that this particular development can't go ahead, but it just means that other developments nearby will need to be better. For example, Marygate, is it Marygate called that? The one that's kind of in the Groves, just off Lord Mayor's Walk. St John's, yeah. I need to look at Google Maps. That, you know, for years now, they've been trying to put EV charging in there. They've got permission, they've dug it all up, they left it as a mess. Maybe that, you know, other nearby facilities maybe need to be improved. If it's not possible for it to be in this location, then it's not possible to be in this location, and making the access so much worse for pedestrians and disabled people is not a price that I think we pay to be able to have these facilities here.
It's fine. Councillor Rose, sorry, which one?
Yeah, as I say, I'm conflicted. I agree with everything you've just said. The counterpoint in my mind is, but at the moment we are causing problems for, not victimising, but making it significantly harder for people who have accessibility needs to move into electric vehicles, which we absolutely should be encouraging and doing. There isn't really an easy way of weighing those two things up, but if we assume that in the future, almost all of, if not all of, at some point, disabled drivers will have electric vehicles, at the moment, any scheme that we come up with will put them further away. And so there isn't an easy way out of this. You know, there isn't a way of structuring this particularly better, other than, I guess, having, you know, a series of disabled spaces, some of which have rapid EV charging, which isn't really possible with this kind of barricade / roofed approach that we've got here that is the common way of doing it. So, you know, as I say, I feel that opposition to it for the same reason, but I also feel a massive support for enabling people with accessibility needs to have electric vehicles. That is what this unlocks that currently isn't really possible in any of the city centre car parks.
Thanks. I'll just say a quick bit. So essentially, I mean, I'm in line with yourselves. I'm reassured by the further information from the applicant in regards to the discussions of the York's Access Forum, where they were supportive of the application, and also comments from the Access Officer about changes to notability, which is obviously a supported scheme in terms of that transition to electricity. So, I mean, I think in the balance, I'm personally happy to support it, would be my view on taking this forward. But unless people have further points for discussion, I'm open to people proposing or seconding, but I will. That's the view.
Just very quickly to echo Councillor Rose's points, now that in the past months, 20% of all vehicles sold are electric vehicles. I think it's important that people with mobility problems are not disincentivized from being part of that going forwards, because it is the direction of travel. So just to echo, you know, yes, there are complicated things in hand, but you're absolutely right in my view. We don't want to have people left behind. I'm happy to propose, Chair.
Anyone like to second? Second it for.
Quite happy to second that proposal.
Yeah, thank you. Gareth, could you please take us through that recommendation? As it stands unamended. I don't think I've touched any conditions.
So the recommendation, after the recommendation that's been moved, is that planning permission be granted for development in accordance with the conditions on page 63, 64, 65 of the agenda report, agenda papers.
Thank you. I'm going to say hands for those who are for the opposite recommendations, just write down that, please. And those who are against, and those who abstain. In that case, with for it, then that will be approved, and that application takes forward for item 4B. That is. I will have to take a second vote if anyone has any strong views on the signage and they would like to raise specific discussion on that. Yeah,
it's just a point on the previous one, which is obviously this is a council application. So even though, you know, I didn't vote against it, I would love the council to look at if there's any way of improving. I know they already have, but we just talked about, for example, the potential for making that rear access slightly better, anything like that. So if the council's willing to just have another look at if there's a better way of doing it than what we've got here, that'd be great. No opinions on signage.
Does anyone have any further comments on item 4C, or are you happy? Can I have a proposer for moving item 4C? Yes, the signage van might propose by Councillor C, and then proposed. Yeah, seconded by Councillor Rose. So yeah, sorry, very quickly. Item 4C.
So officer recommendation is that permission be granted permission be granted subject to the condition on page 83 and 84 of the officer report.
Okay. Thank you. Again, can I see those who are in favour of moving that as a recommendation? And those who are, is that as in favour? And those who are against? Sorry, would you like to? Didn't realise the vote was happening.
Abstaining.
Abstaining. Okay, and those who would like to abstain? Yes, there you go. So that application is approved, and we'll move on to the next item. But if you'd like to take a second just to let yourself out, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Chair,
Yes,
we're moving on to item 4D.
yes.
I need your advice as to whether there's a possible conflict of interest.
Yes, that is fine.
My partner is a nursery school teacher and she works at St Paul's Nursery, which is being relocated to Clifton Green Primary School over the coming months because of construction. So is it best that I just sit back while you're doing this? It's not the actual school.
So it's outside of the curtilage of the school.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I think you have the.
Was that just confirmation as to whether I need to?
Children.
Not the school, so it doesn't apply to this. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think we're clear. Yeah, happy to proceed then.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah, Gareth, let's take us through item 4D, Clifton
So,
Primary School.
This is this is a proposal for a 2.4 meter high replacement fencing on the boundary of the school. So it sits the back end of the rear of the playground on Crombie Avenue, where it puts the playing field for the school. Members were picked up. Originally, the proposals were more expansive, went along the back of the properties on Walton Avenue and then along the public footpath as well. Those have been removed from the scheme because the applicants have dropped the height of the fence to a point that it doesn't require planning permission. So this is the only bit that exceeds 2.4, 2 meters, which is the permitted development limit. So the proposal is palisade fencing with a powder coated green finish. So we're looking at this area here, and so this is the 1.5 meter high bow top fencing, which will be removed and replaced by that fencing. To point out, it's only at the rear of the playground. It's not this fencing on the back end of the road. I don't know what you must look at. Tell me to stop, or I'll just get going.
There isn't no updates.
There's no updates.
No updates. There are no speakers. Surprising. Does anyone have any questions or one go before we move through? Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I don't, in the various paragraphs we've got here, I don't really see the issues tackled that are in the representations. And I just wondered whether we could get a brief bullet point, one sentence each run through of, you know, the loss of view on playing fields, the risk of injury to children and the stuff that's in 4.2. I've got my own opinions on it from sort of common sense and looking at the site, but I don't know the site very well and we haven't got any details, answers to those questions in front of us.
So my understanding of the issues from terms of the loss of outlook, the loss of the view, the kissing gate, the right of access onto the school field for residents of Walton Avenue, and then the noise around the fence. These are all issues regarding the fencing proposed to the rear of Walton Avenue, and then this gate into the playing field from Lady Road. Yes, Lady Road. So that was when the 2.4 meter high fence was proposed all the way around. So that's now been removed from the scheme. It's going to be replaced by a 2 meter high fence, which doesn't require planning permission. In terms of the children climbing the fence, say it's, I'm not sure I can answer that one. It's designed at a height and to be of a design that children can't climb. So it's the whole reason for being. less able to climb.
Yeah, councillor Belly.
I don't understand from the report the issue of this access, where one of the representatives has requested a kissing gate. What is the current access? And what is the access proposed here?
I don't know, I haven't looked at it because the application doesn't relate to that area anymore.
Oh, so that area is, it's not been changed, it's removed completely.
it's
so the access-
removed.
It's not changing the access.
It's
at all.
removed from the planning application. The access is being changed with the introduction of new fencing, but that fencing doesn't require planning permission, so it's not in front of members.
Yeah, so
It was, but it isn't anymore.
Yeah, essentially, when the planning application was originally submitted, people submitted comments to say, we disagree with that. Since then, they've taken out the vast majority of that and done it under permitted development rights. So all that's left is the area of 2.4 metre fencing around the playground. So those other issues that were previously flagged are no longer for consideration as part of the application that we look at in front of us now. That's
So-
purely the playground area. So those issues we aren't here to consider.
So we don't know if the gate's being changed, but if it is.
It's not our
relevant anymore.
control.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Think. Sorry, question, councillor.
Do you imagine for one moment that if what we see before us was the original application, that would be before this committee at all? Surely, it's pretty straightforward.
I think the call-in is with. Yeah, the call-in was about, the call-in was in response to the concerns of people in Waterloo. So I doubt very much we would have been called in.
Yeah.
As it stands.
I don't see any other questions. I'm happy to move to discussion, but based on what we've discussed here, I'm also happy for people to just move to proposing and seconding if they don't have anything they specifically want to discuss.
Can I move that, please?
Yes. So would anyone like to, if there's nothing else to be added, would anyone like to second that proposal to move? Yeah, councillor Rose to second, yeah. Okay, in that case, I continue. Sorry.
So the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the condition on page 91 of the papers.
Thank you. In that case, see all those who were for moving the recommendation, I've read out there. Yeah, so that is unanimous and that application is approved. Right. We will move on to the final application. The final application, which is item for the presentation, please.
Yeah, so the planning application, so it's not a planning application, got it wrong right from the start. An application for advertisement consent to allow for the display of community and non-commercial flags from the existing flagpole on the gable of the mansion house. So there's a graphic of the red flag flying over the mansion house and a photograph, which I think it's the Ukrainian flag is flying at the moment. It's in the conservation area, Central Historical Conservation Area. It's a grade 1 listed building. Just draw members' attention to the fact that we can only exercise our powers in respect of amenity and public safety when considering applications for advertisement consent. That's all I have to say, there's no update.
Thank you. There isn't really questions on plans. I'm minded to move to public participation and then open up questions afterwards in that mind. We do have one speaker. Are they available? Ready? Yes, good. Thank you. I know it's been a long wait for him. Yes, so the first speaker and only speaker is Flick Williams, who is joining us via Zoom. If you're ready to speak when you can, Flick, and aware that you know the rules, so I will leave it in your hands to talk. I'll give it a pause. Does anyone have any questions for officers before we move into public participation, just to give some time? Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, we kind of skimmed it and this document kind of skims it. So if you could elaborate a little bit on what is currently permitted without this decision and what will not be permitted after this decision. You mentioned kind of non-commercial. Does that mean that there are limitations on what can be flown? I wasn't fully clear when I was reading the paper on exactly what we can already do and what we can't, and what that will change.
Because that's an existing flagpole. Where are we? Yeah, so in 5 point, the other regulations are in two parts. I'm not quite sure why the officer has chosen the second part before the first part, but so 5.8, these are flags that the advertisement regulations don't apply to, so we don't have control over. So they tend to be national flags, subsection C is island, county, district flags. Then armed forces flags, armed forces day flag, and saints, any saints flag, I think it is. And then there are flags that can be flown under deemed consent, which are in 5.7. And they're flags where people don't have to apply for permission. But ultimately the council has powers of discontinuance. So we can take action against flags which are flown. So there's a bit to be added to some of those. So under subsection B there, where it says referring to a specific event, there has to be a specific event taking place in the building rather than just generally. And then the 6 horizontal equal stripes is the rainbow flag. So red, yellow, green, blue, and violet, if I remember my song correctly. The application specifies community and non-commercial flags and then I think in 1.2 where we referred to, that's what's been, so your pride, trans awareness, UNESCO, city and media arts, they're suggestions by the applicants of the type of flags they're looking to fly. In terms of the second part of the question, I think if members were concerned about, say, being non-commercial, for example, they would have to put a condition on to cover that as an issue, because whilst that's what's being applied for, I think if we don't condition that, then they could probably fly any flag under the regulations because of what's set out in paragraph 5.13. So yeah, if that was, officers left it open to members, but if that was a concern of members, then you could put that condition.
Yeah, you've got a question.
I guess just to make sure I understand. So when I read this, my understanding was 5.7, 5.8 applies to anyone flying a flag. So 5.8 in my house, I could fly Fiji's flag, great. But if I want to fly Real Madrid's flag, then the council reserves the right to say, actually, no, that's not really relevant. You know, it has a device, it is bearing the device of a sports club, but it's not relevant and it's obstructed for whatever reason. It might have some connotations. But this is the council's own flag we're talking about. So the council can decide that case by case, everything that's in 5.7 and 5.8. What we've got in front of us is then expanding that from all of 5.7 and 5.8, which we can already do without this request, to then the stuff in 1.1, but it says community and other flags, which seems to me relatively vague. So what you're suggesting is that we would have to put a condition on what flags we would want to limit the council to put if we wanted to limit the council. Is that, have I understood that correctly?
I think, yeah, I wonder if that's
So there are examples in 1.2, but
yeah, because the display of community and non-commercial flags is taken directly from the application. So I'm not quite sure why other flags. But granting this permission without a condition would effectively allow, I think, any.
But of course, it's in the, yeah, it's in the council's remit to choose what flags it flies. Through other protocols, essentially. Yeah, Councillor Fassy, you've got a question, and then we'll move to the.
Thank you. Yeah. Can I ask the question? Because we've got here, the application is by City of York Council. And then we're talking about the application seeks permission to do this and that. Who is City of York Council in this context? That's my question. Because
it's the corporate body, isn't it? It's not I think applications that are put in by the City of York Council are always considered to be by the council rather than by individual service areas.
What I'm trying to get at is who would be deciding what flags went on? Would this be a decision made by the administration? Would it be a decision made by full council? I'm not entirely clear.
So in one point,
have to agree by political leaders and the Lord Mayor.
Yeah.
So it's not full council
No.
as stated here. But it's a consensus of all the council, of the political leaders, just to make sure I've understood it.
I think the main thing is the way that this is put out at the moment. This is essentially giving planning permission to actually have planning permission to be able to fly flags. But the protocol for how we fly those flags actually could change in the future. It could be a different thing, but essentially this is just to firm up that legally through a planning perspective, that is fine, but it doesn't change how the council chooses how it does it, what flags we choose to fly. It just gives consent for the flying. Technically, if we've used two new flags previously, it's been in breach of planning. So this is to firm up the actual planning legalities of what those flags could be. But obviously there's a broader conversation outside of this committee as to how that works, I guess, is the thing that's different. We're just choosing purely, is it acceptable for that area to have different flags on it to what's currently allowed? That's what we're being asked here today. Yeah. Does it, and also specifically, does it impact on public safety or amenity of that square? Not anything else to do with what type of flag it might be, etc. It's just purely those grounds is what we're being asked. Yes,
Can I add to a degree, it's putting our own house in order, because as the authority, City of York Council, really is not well placed to make any comment on flags flown by others without appropriate planning consent. If on our own mansion house, we're not actually following the protocols, not in terms of the flag protocols, but planning protocols.
Is that supplementary or sorry? I'll come, Councillor Waller, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the planning application, it refers to the government guidance, which it does detail that 2 flags can be flown at once. With in recommendation that the Union flag is uppermost. So we're still working on the basis of only flying 1 flag at a time. But because it referred to the government, I thought, well, let's have a look at that, what that says. And it's not clear what flags, the whole range of flags that might be flown. And here it says all request flags have to be agreed by the political group leaders. It doesn't explain whether that's a majority decision or a unanimous decision. Now it's written that the Lord Mayor could agree or veto it. So it's setting out that what process by which people will see there's a flag there, and that's how it's got there.
Yeah, but I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but are we here to comment on the process by which that flag gets there, or whether?
No,
No.
in my view, we're here to make a decision of whether it is acceptable to fly flags from the existing flagpole. Which aren't flags that can be already flown without the need for the permission of the authority.
Yeah.
The planning authority, that is.
Yeah.
And the decisions of the council as flag flyers, I would say are not really within the remit of the planning authority.
Yeah. I will come to you. I'm just gonna, while we've got the speaker on the line, I'm just gonna pause to go to open that up. So we'll just pause on the questions for a second. Yeah, when Flick, if you're there, when you're ready, if you want to start your 3 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards. So we'll just
Yeah, good evening. Sorry, I was watching on YouTube, so it was on delay.
No problem at all. Thank you for waiting, and where it's been a bit of a long night.
Okay, thank you. I object to this planning application, both in principle and on practical grounds. Some of you may recall I spoke at council in July on the matter, and subsequent interactions lead me to believe my remarks were misunderstood. So let me clarify. This council has had a policy of purchasing and flying the disability pride flag for 3 years. In all that time, one has not even been acquired, whilst other flags continue to be flown. So my principled objection is that this is a way to show favouritism to some groups at the expense of others. The council makes my case for me because despite my speech in July, with that reminder of your policy, the papers for today's meeting give 3 examples of flags that might be flown subsequent to planning approval, and the disability pride flag is not one of them. It shows unconscious bias and confirms to disabled people are placed firmly at the bottom of the equalities hierarchy, together with the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community for whom you don't even have a policy to fly their flag. But some might argue flying either the disability pride flag or the GRT flag would be insulting given the level of progress in this city for the rights of either group. And that's the point. You can't have a debate on the issues with flags, but you can signal favouritism or exclusion by what flags you choose to fly. It is dangerous territory. For example, some might now take offence at the Ukrainian flag, given its government has exceeded its term limit, so no longer a democracy, or perhaps because of Ukraine having been given a further £3 billion in the same week this government removed the winter fuel allowance from 10 million UK pensioners. And then on to the practical. This issue is being decided whilst the budget consultation is underway, preparing citizens for a potential 4.99% increase in council tax next year, whilst warning of more cuts to services equivalent to 30 million over the next 3 years. We constantly hear how stretched we are regarding officer resource. Again, my case is made for me by the fact the closing date to register to speak at this meeting is listed as Tuesday, the 11th of October 2022. When you read as many committee papers as I do, the amount of mistakes and errors has increased exponentially. I appreciate officers are overstretched and under-resourced, so fine, let's not waste any more of theirs or members' time on flags. Let us have debate of issues in meetings and jettison tokenistic virtue signalling flag flying of community flags altogether. I know for absolute certainty that whether you fly the disability pride flag or don't, it will not make one jot of difference to my disabled life. And I would like to bet that no one here could actually describe to me what the disability pride flag even symbolises. Please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the speaker? Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, so, sorry to pin it down to what this meeting is as a planning meeting, Flip, but I guess the question in front of us today is about the fact that we can fly all the flags that are listed in 5.7, 5.8. So 6 horizontal lines, national flags such as Ukraine, those are already permitted without this decision going either way. The difference is that we then can expand it out to include things like the disability pride flag, which doesn't meet the current rules but wouldn't meet the new rules. I guess I just want to ask if there's a specific planning objection in what you're describing beyond the concern that already exists today with the ability for the council to choose which flags it flies selectively.
Yeah, no, you're correct, Councillor Rose. Technically, I suppose my objection is not on planning grounds, but I think it's important to make the points that I've made. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So thank you for your time, Flick. Does anyone have further questions for the officers? Councillor Rose.
Go back to the question now.
Yes.
So number one was what we're weighing up here as a committee is basically 5.14. It says it's not considered the display of a single flag would be allowed if consent was granted, have an adverse impact on nearby historic, architectural, cultural features, the general amenity of the location. Given that we can fly all of those existing flags, is the question in front of us today whether we, on balance, think that the ability to fly other flags has no extra adverse impact on the flags that can already be flown? Or is it broader? Is it flags in general? I just want, if we can do something now and all this does is allow something extra, is it just whether that bit has specifically an adverse impact on specifically that historical, architectural, cultural amenity of the location bit?
Yes, the last bit. So you're just considering the ability to fly flags outside of what can already be flown, and whether that is harmful to public safety, which it isn't, or amenity, which is really the issue in front of you.
So if hypothetically speaking, we felt that flying any country's flag, and we can think of some countries maybe we don't fully support and would want to fly the flag of, but if there's, if we could fly a flag that is a national flag, we think that's okay. But if we think that putting a artificial made up flag that has something egregious on it that we wouldn't want flown there could theoretically challenge the amenity, that might be grounds to oppose this. But we could put a condition in place. For example, the policy that's described here could be changed at next full council. We could vote to change the way we fly the flag and who decides those things. But we could put a condition on this to say, for these types of flag, it does have to be agreed with all party leaders or something to that effect. That would be a viable condition or not?
No, I think that goes beyond what we're looking at here.
Okay.
That's
so it's just a binary
I think
decision
that's a
on,
decision
does
for
the different type of flag change the impact on amenity?
Yeah, I'd
Okay,
say so.
thank
you. Councillor Waller.
I listened to Councillor Arnold's comments. I'm just concerned that we're opening a Pandora's box without requesting or making clear who decides what flags. From a planning authority perspective, this is to say you could fly a flag outside of the list of flags that you can already do. But I think it would be important to get to indicate the request from this committee that there's clarity by the next stage of the corporate process by which this is decided, so that we're not giving carte blanche. That there must be a policy process requested, even if it's not within the remit of the committee to insist, but you can request it so that this is achieving the objective, the flexibility that you want, but without saying anything goes.
We're a public authority, aren't we? So the council is a public body with and members have the ability to change the council's procedures through full council, I assume, for if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of what type of flags are flying. I think for the purposes of the planning authority decision, my view would be the officer's view is that the flying of the type of flags which are set out in the very short list provided by the applicants, and then with that overall community stroke non-commercial flag wouldn't be harmful to amenity and public safety. I'm not sure we get into the realms of trying to then control the council's own policy in terms of what flags are flown. It seems to be a step beyond what we would normally do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the argument be that we have to take it as it currently stands, current protocol as it is, and it's for members to weigh up whether they feel that is that what is being decided is a reasonable risk, a reasonable balance in terms of what's there for amenity. So I think that's for you to make your own judgment on. Councillor Bassey.
Can I just ask for some legal advice? Because here in 1.2, it describes the status quo. All requests to fly flags have to be agreed by all political group leaders. And the Lord Mayor. If that were to change, would it have to be changed via a full council meeting? In which case, my response would be, well, okay, that's all fine. I think the concerns that are being raised are kind of around the area of, as Councillor Wallace says, this Pandora's box. We say yes to a flag, and then someone decides, a different group of people decides what goes up. So can you confirm whether or not that all requests to fly flags has to be agreed? Is part of our constitution, would require constitutional change?
Chair, Councillor Bassey, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. But as I see it, as I think Gareth has explained, I think the sole issue for members is because safety is not an issue. The sole consideration is material consideration is amenity. And I think, as I see it, the issue is that given that a number of flags can be flown currently without the need for advertisement consent, it's whether the increased variety in flags types would have any impact on amenity. That's the consideration for members.
And to respond, I think what we're sort of saying is that we all conceive that there is a risk at some point potentially, and not presumably at this moment in time, but that a flag could be flown that would potentially provide a threat to community safety. And it's whether that can be constrained or whether we have confidence that other things prevent that from happening. Am I kind of summing up what we're saying?
Public safety does tend to be, it says this is what it includes. So public safety is things like persons using a highway, railway, waterway, dock, or whether the sign obscures a traffic sign, railway signal, or whether it's likely to hinder the operation of a device used for purposes of security or surveillance, rather than the flag driving people to riots because of its very content. It's not. I don't think that's what the public safety angle. It's more the angle of. I think our advice is that the angle is whether a flag outside of those flags that are already permitted flying on from the roof of the mansion house would harm amenity in terms of the character and appearance of the building, the conservation area, that sort of thing.
Okay, Councillor Cullick.
Thank you. I guess I speak with some experience in terms of the Mansion House and the role of the Lord Mayor, and I can say that the protocol is not one that has always been followed, and may in part have be why this has come before us. But that isn't the question. We're not here to debate, decide, or otherwise the protocol, except whether or not there would be some very specific consequences of raising a flag on the Mansion House in terms of such things as public safety or the context of the very important conservation area. even considerations around public safety, it's not difficult to imagine situations where raising a national flag might be interpreted as compromising public safety. And I think of some examples of that in the not too distant past in other places where people have climbed such buildings in very public spaces in order to bring a flag down. That wouldn't address this. It clearly doesn't include any commercial flags. I mean, for example, if it was, it's unsurprising that we see an Aviva flag flying above the Aviva building. Well, we're not talking about commercial flags. We're not talking about any form of advertising. So it's very hard to think in principle why there should be any objection on the grounds that we're considering. And for that reason, I find it difficult to give anything other than approval to support approval. That doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about the protocol and the practice of that protocol. And I think that it is important, whether the flag is included in this list or not, that the protocol of group leaders and the Lord Mayor deciding unanimously together is one that ought to be followed, ought to have been followed. But that is not what we're considering at the late stage of this meeting this evening. It is simply, I think, whether there was issues of public safety or amenity or appropriateness within the conservation area. And I struggle to find any reason not to support the application.
Chair, if we move on to debate from questions then.
I'm happy to, but if you have a question, then I'm happy for you to.
No, I just.
No, that's fine. Yeah, if you'd like to contribute to the debate, we'll just move straight through to the debate.
Yeah, happy to move to debate, yeah. In that case, do you have your hand up for debate first? No, okay. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, I think it's 1.2 meters by 1.8 meters, but like really high up and far away, so it looks even smaller. And I just don't see how the scale, design, material, finish, position, or number could cause any harm to amenity, or safety, goes without saying. I think that if the applicant was anyone else, we wouldn't be asking for the minutiae of the details of their management system, of exactly what is their organisation's management structure for choosing flags. So I think it's disproportionate and unnecessary to do the same when the council is the applicant. I just think it's outside of the realms of what we can or should consider as a planning committee. Thanks.
Councillor Rose, sorry, do you want to add something?
I'll just say my full opinion, I think, if that's all right. I was just looking at the constitution. There's nothing in the constitution that I can see. It's got upholding the historical and ceremonial traditions of, as part of the constitution, as part of the mayor's role, but I don't even know if that means anything practically. But even if it was in the constitution with a majority, you could just change the constitution and say, actually, we only want the singular leader of the council to make the decision unilaterally. So I think you either have to take it as it is today, or you have to take it as the fact that it can be changed, whether it's constitutional amendments or not. For me, I think I'm just looking at the representations of the concerns, and let's take the five in order. Number one, the council could do biased virtue signalling flags. Well, it could do already. We've got all the different countries available. We've got anything with 6 stripes available. If there's anything that you want to use that for in terms of virtue signalling, then the concerns raised here, and I've seen online concerns about, Ukraine, LGBT flags, etc. If that's what you think of as virtue signalling, that's already allowed. Does this exacerbate it? Probably not, in my opinion. Existing protocol around group leaders, it says in that comment, the only flags flying should be, and then it's not the only flags that should be flying, because we have that statute in place already that says that you can fly all these other things, but a desire for it to be unanimous across parties. A thing around the blanket approval for flags not listed would breach planning. Well, that's why it's here. In terms of a concerted campaign to remove dignity from the Lord Mayor, I think we can all agree that it's been used quite dignifiedly by multiple Lord Mayors to try and weigh up the sensitivities of the times and understand when to be used. But it's not just the Lord Mayor, you have to have cross-party consent anyway. And then the bit for me is the behind closed doors decisions for conflicts occurring. Again, if people don't like the Ukraine flag flying, that is not part of this conversation discussion. If people don't like the 6 horizontal strap LGBT flag flying, that's already allowed regardless of whatever's here. So for me, the question comes down to that specific point of, at the moment, what can't I fly? Well, I can't fly, let's say hypothetically, the US Confederacy flag. And if you put that up there, it could create a hypothetical risk to some members of the public, or it could look unseemly. Is that any different to what we've got today with the ability to fly North Korea's flag or whatever it might be? I don't think there's enough of a difference, really. The minutiae is the point we're all making here, which is actually how you make that decision is the important thing, because you can make bad decisions about the flag already. I think that isn't something for us to take as a committee. It is something we could refer to another committee to look at. It could be something we put in the constitution. I defer to chair and vice chair to decide exactly what we want to do in terms of recommendation, or happy to follow it. But for me, this application here, there is no grounds that make sense to object for me.
Thanks. Not seeing any other hands. I don't have anything else personally to add. So, I mean, I'm happy to personally propose that we move the offer as a recommendation. Would anyone like to second that? Yeah, Councillor Melly. So Gary, if you could take us through that, please. That would be.
Recommended that advertisement consent be granted, subject to the condition on page 104 of the report.
Thank you. Can I see all those who are in favour of moving the recommendation? And that is unanimous. So in that case, that is approved. There's no urgent business. So I thank everyone for their time this evening and all their contributions, and we will close the meeting there. Thanks.